Okay, good morning, folks. The time is 10:01. I will call the November 2nd, 2023 Planning Board meeting to order. We have the following board members with us. We are joined by Vice Chair Bailey.
Good morning.
We have Commissioner Washington.
Good morning.
And Commissioner Dorner.
Hello.
And I'm Chair Shapiro. Please note that the deadline for all participant pre-registration and for all submission of materials and exhibits was 12 noon on the Tuesday before this planning board meeting. Registered speakers may join the meeting with a link provided in the email provided by the planning board office or listen by phone by utilizing the call-in number provided in the email as well. Of course, anyone may tune in to watch the planning board meeting via live stream. And if you wish to speak or become a person of record, you may use our online web form, which you'll see referenced on the screen before you. If you wish to, in addition to the commissioners, we are joined by Laura Tellerico, our Associate General Counsel. Good morning, Ms. Tellerico. We have Jessica Jones, our Planning Board Administrator. We have Joe Parsons, our Senior Technical Hearing Writer, and James Hunt, the Division Chief of the Development Review Division. Good morning, Mr. Hunt. We also have staff members Kenneth Flanagan and Ryan Cron are going to be helping us with technology, as always, quite ably behind the scenes. So thanks to everybody. Let's move on to the agenda. We'll go to item 2 on our agenda to start, and I would look for a motion to approve the draft minutes of October 19, 2023.
Move approval, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Thank you. I saw Vice Chair Bailey's lips move first, but you were the first one with the audio. Do we have a second?
Yeah, second. I think we did have a second.
All right. We have a motion by Commissioner Washington, a second by Vice Chair Bailey. Discussion. I'll call the roll. Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 4-0. Next item, we'll go to item 3C on our agenda. This is a Parks and Rec item. There's a land purchase agreement. I'll turn to Mr. Sun, who will give us this presentation. And this is an action item, Commissioners. Mr. Sun, take it away.
Good morning, Chairman Shapiro, fellow planning board members. Thank you. We're here again, once again, good morning, Chairman Shapiro, fellow planning board members. For the record, my name is Paul Sun, Land Acquisition Specialist, Department of Parks and Recreation. We are here today to present a land purchase agreement for addition to Western Branch Stream Valley Park. Next slide, please. We are currently looking at approximately 53 acres of property located in Upper Marlboro on the east side of Brown Station Road at its intersection with Brook Lane. And directly across Brown Station Road is the county's Animal Services Control Center. The property is then identified on the FY 23-24 Land Acquisition Priorities List rankings. And the property is in Service Area 6 of No Needs Area for Parkland and received a ranking of 57 points. Next slide, please. Property is contiguous to Western Branch Stream Valley Park to the east and Fox Chase Park and Brown Station Road to the west. We also estimate that the property is approximately 90% wooded or forested. The justifications for acquisition include contributing priority conservation needs, providing connectivity as it links together other MNC PPC parks. The acquisition would not be inconsistent with master plans or sector plans. The property will provide undeveloped natural areas in developed tier. Next slide, please. In July of 2022, we obtained independent appraisals on the property, and we ultimately reached a consensus on a purchase offer for the property. As part of our due diligence process, we obtained the boundary survey and determined the property is 53.6 acres in size. Next slide, please. As part of our surveyor's findings, an encroachment was identified on the adjacent parcel 34, which bifurcates the property. This encroachment includes a carport, several debris piles. In cases such as this in the past, we have carved out the encroachment area and excluded that land area from our purchase. We have delineated an area approximately 4/10 of an acre to avoid any encroachments. The owner has agreed to this price reduction for decreased acreage based on a per square foot adjustment. So I just wanted to sort of expand on this. The department is interested in parcel 34, and we have contacted the owner, but he just recently remodeled the whole house, so he said that he's not interested in selling at this time. Staff has also visited the property and to research the cleared area that you see north of to the north. And it was determined that approximately 5 years ago, WSSC came in and had to do a restoration project on the sewer line along Western Branch. And that area was cleared, and they built an access road to Brown Station Road, sort of their staging area. We also noticed that the adjacent owner on parcel 34 seemed to be respectful of the boundaries, didn't have any further encroachments on that side of the property. So in summary, the purchase agreement will be for 53.18 acres based on the appraised values. Staff recommends approval of this purchase agreement as noted. And wish to note that should you approve, we have requested addition of the resolution to this morning's consent agenda item. This concludes staff's presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Sugg. Commissioners, questions for staff? None, thank you. Mr. McNeil, anything you want to add?
No, I think it's been handled sufficiently, Mr. Sung. But for the record, I'm Albert McNeil, Deputy for Administration and Development with the Department of Parks and Recreation.
Thank you, Mr. McNeil. Appreciate that, Mr. Sung. Thank you. Commissioners, if there's no questions, I would look for a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the recommendation of staff and approve the land purchase agreement for the addition to Western Branch Stream Valley Park.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Washington, second by Vice Chair Bailey. Discussion? No discussion. I'll call the roll. Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 4-0. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McNeil. Thank you, Mr. Sun.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next, we'll move to our consent agenda items. There are a few of them. Is there anyone from the public or any commissioners who wish to remove any of the items? It's items 4B, D, E, or F, which is discussing these items. If not, I would look for a motion.
Mr. Chair, after consideration of the records for items number 4B, 4D, and 4E through 4F, I move adoption of staff findings and approval of these items on the consent agenda in accordance with the recommendation of staff.
Second.
Got a motion by Vice Chair Bailey, second by Commissioner Washington. Discussion. I will call the roll. Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 4-0. Thank you. Next, we'll go to our regular agenda items. We'll start with item 5. It's a detailed site plan, DSP 22033 Norris Angels Early Learning Center. I don't believe we have a representation from the applicant. We have Mr. Vaughn who will give the staff presentation. I know we do have a representative from the applicant. I'm sorry.
Yes, I do.
Now you also.
Yes.
But before we do that, we'll hear from staff. Mr. Vaughn.
Do the sound check. Mr. Shapiro, can you hear me?
We can hear you fine.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chair and member of the Planning Board. For the record, I'm Emery Huang with Urban Design Section. Item number 5 showing on your screen is detailed site plan DSP-22033 for Norris Angels Early Learning Center. The applicants proposed to create a daycare center with a maximum enrollment of 50 children through the conversion of one retail space within an integrated shopping center. Based on the findings presented in a technical staff report, urban design staff recommended that planning board approve the detailed site plan DSP-22033 subject to the recommended conditions of approval within the technical staff report. The applicant has reviewed these conditions and did not propose any revision to them. This concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Commissioners, any questions for staff? No questions. We will turn to the applicant. We also have a representative from the city of Bowie, Mr. Minor. Mr. Minor, are you intending to speak as well?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. So for Mr. Minor as well as Mr. Nwosu, this is an evidentiary hearing. Mr. Nwosu, are you on the line?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. But for both of you, just a reminder and some action I need from you. This is an evidentiary hearing. So we're requiring those intending to provide testimony to take an oath. So for both of you, let me ask you both to raise your right hands so I can swear you in. You solemnly swear or affirm that your testimony will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to you both. All right, Mr. Nwosu, you are representing the applicant, so I'll turn to you first.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Shapiro, planning board members. So one of the major reasons why we selected that strategic location at the Collington Plaza Mall is essentially for the convenience for the parents, the working families that reside in that zone area, and also for the shoppers that frequent that mall. Now, we'll offer before and after care programs where working families, parents, and the shoppers can drop off and pick up their kids accordingly. We also have a bus that will also pick up the kids from school. Pick up the kids from school and drop off the children as well, relative to the before and after care programs that we're going to be offering. Now, in addition to providing child developmental services to the children and employment opportunities to the residents in the zone area, we'll also be providing tuition assistance programs to assist eligible families to pay for child care fees. We'll also provide employment advancement programs for the teachers there as well. Essentially, it's I think it's it will be an ideal location for the families and the workers and shoppers. Obviously, I visit that mall area there, and so that's one of the main reasons why we kind of picked that location. Are there any questions?
Commissioners, questions for the applicant?
Just one question. You referenced shoppers. So will your center be offering kind of spot on childcare for if I'm in the mall to shop, I can drop my kid off for like a couple of hours or something? Or I'm just curious.
You know, that's something. That's a good idea. That's something we can incorporate into our program. So yeah.
Well, I'm not recommending it. I'm just curious. I've just never heard shoppers being referenced as a clientele. So.
No, I mean, well, but that's not a bad idea, honestly. So that's something we'll definitely consider.
Okay.
You may have created a new class of childcare.
I know, right?
I just did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for the applicant? Any other business suggestions from commissioners? No? All right. With that, we'll turn to Mr. Minor, representing the city of Bowie. Mr. Minor, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Board. I'm Joe Minor, the City of Bowie Planning Director. I'm here to support the request for the detailed site plan approval at Collington Plaza. Our City Council reviewed this application on October 2nd and was very pleased to see this business coming into the community. And so the council voted to support the detailed site plan with no conditions. Also, I wanted to just note for the record, the city does have a annexation agreement in place on the property so that the city has the opportunity to approve any uses going into the shopping center site plan. And so it was an important step that they had to come to the city and obtain our approval. And I would like to recognize Mr. Wong for his cooperation in this and the applicants as well, because any of the issues that came up the applicant quickly addressed those in the revised plan. So we're very happy and we recommend approval of the site plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minor. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Minor representing the city of Bowie? None. There's nobody else who signed up to speak. I will close this public hearing. Commissioners, what is your pleasure on this item?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the findings of staff and approve DSP-22033 along with the condition as outlined in staff's report.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Washington, a second by Vice Chair Bailey. Discussion. No discussion. I will call the roll. Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 4-0. And also, good luck with the venture. Mr. Minor, thank you as always. And Mr. Huang, thank you for your staff presentation and the excellent work on this. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We'll now move to item 6 on our agenda. This is a plan of subdivision 4-23006 Glorious subdivision. We have Mr. Haller representing the applicant. Mr. Diaz-Campbell will be giving the staff presentation. I will turn to staff first. Mr. Diaz-Campbell, the floor is yours.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. For the record, I am Eddie Diaz-Campbell, Planner 3 with the subdivision section. Item number 6 on the agenda is the preliminary plan of subdivision for Glorious subdivision 4-23006. Subject project proposes 21 lots, 2 parcels, and 1 outlot for development of 21 single-family detached units. The application is subject to approved certificate of adequacy 80Q-2023-011. For this application, staff are in agreement with the applicant's requested revisions to conditions of approval, and no citizens have signed up to speak. Staff recommend adoption of the findings of the technical staff report and approval of the preliminary plan of subdivision, subject to conditions contained in the staff report. This concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Diaz-Campbell. Commissioners, any questions for staff on this item? Seeing none, I'll turn to you, Mr. Haller.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Thomas Haller, an attorney with offices in Largo, on behalf of the owners of the property, who are also the applicants. Also signed up today is Mr. Gabriel Ackham, who is one of the owners of the property, and he's here in case there's any questions. This is a relatively straightforward application. It's smallish 7.5 acre property that's being proposed to be subdivided, as staff noted, into 21 lots. The property is located on the west side of Brandywine Road, where Thrift Road intersects with it. There's a traffic signal right at that location. And so the entrance roadway into this subdivision will extend from the existing 3-legged intersection, and the signal will be modified to allow for a 4-legged intersection to allow traffic to come into the subdivision. We concur with the findings of staff and the staff's recommendation with the 3 minor modifications to the conditions which are set forth in applicant's Exhibit 1. I do want to note one thing with regard to Condition 8. Condition 8, as it was originally drafted, required the applicant to construct bike lanes on Brandywine Road. And we noted to staff that the bike lanes already exist on Brandywine Road at this time. They extend from south to north, with the exception of right where the intersection is. And so we didn't want there to be any confusion about whether we were building them as opposed to basically restoring them once the intersection improvements are done. So the revision to Condition 8 was simply to add the word provide instead of construct. And as staff indicated, the intent of that change is that to the extent that we do not have to modify the existing bike lane, that by providing it in the right of way, that will satisfy the condition. We just wanted to avoid any confusion as to whether we were providing a new bike lane or simply retaining the one that's already there. But we're happy to answer any questions that you have on this project.
Thank you, Mr. Haller. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Haller? Seeing none. Okay. Anyone else you need to be speaking, Mr. Haller?
No, not this morning. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. There's no one else who signed up to speak on this, Commissioner, so what is your pleasure on this item?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the findings of staff and approve preliminary plan 4-23006, TCP 1-009-2023, and variance to section 25-122B1G, along with the conditions as detailed in staff's report and is further modified by applicant exhibit number 1.
Got a motion by, I believe Vice Chair Bailey said second.
Yeah.
I did say second.
All right, there we go. Got a motion to second. Discussion on the motion. Seeing no discussion, I will call the roll. Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 4-0. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Haller. Thank you, Ms. Diaz-Campbell. We will now move on to item 7 on our agenda. This is a detailed site plan BSP 20054-01, the enclave at Brandywine. We have Mr. Haller representing the applicant. Mr. Haller, there's a few other people signed up to speak along with you. This is also an evidentiary hearing. I will swear them in if they step forward to speak at that time, unless you know that they're going to be speaking. I have Mr. Horowitz and then Ms.
Question, so that's fine, Mr. Chairman. We can have them sworn in if it's necessary for them to speak.
Okay, thank you. So without turn to staff, Mr. Huang, floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Planning Board. Good to see you again. For the record, I'm Emery Huang with the Urban Design section. The number items
as well.
The number item 7 on your screen is detailed site plan DSP-20054-01 for enclave at Brandywine. The applicant proposes to amend the architecture and the square footage of the 104 single-family attached dwelling units approved in DSP-20054. The applicant has proposed a revision to a condition 1A in the memorandum titled Applicant's Exhibit 1 prior to the noon daylight on October 31st, 2023. Staff have reviewed and agreed with the revised conditions. Based on the finding presented in the technical step report, Urban Design staff recommended the Planning Board approve the detailed site plan DSP-20054-01 subject to the recommended conditions of approval within the technical step report as revised by the one condition provided by the applicants in the applicant's exhibit 1. This concludes step presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huang. Commissioners, any questions for staff on this item? No questions. We'll turn to the applicant, Mr. Haller. Hello again, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, once again, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Again, for the record, Thomas Haller on behalf of the applicant in this case, which is Sage Ventures LLC. Sage is a Baltimore-based developer and owner of real estate. Mr. Gil Horowitz is signed up as well if there are any questions. But this is, they're beginning to do ground up projects in Prince George's County, and this is one of their first projects in the county. The planning board may remember this property. It was almost exactly 2 years ago today that the board approved the original site plan for this. As originally proposed, the project was going to be a LIHTC affordable rental townhouse project. Unfortunately, with the increase in interest rates, that project was not able to be financed and that project did not go forward. And when the property became available, Sage acquired the property with the intention of constructing market rate townhomes on the property. So the purpose of this application, the sole purpose of this application is to substitute the architecture proposed by Sage for that was originally approved. And typically a substitution of architecture would be done by the planning director. But in this particular case, a new detailed site plan was required because the units that are proposed by Sage are larger than the units that were proposed in the original application. And under the regulations applicable to planning director level revisions, an increase in square footage of more than 10% requires a a full site plan review. So that's the reason for this application. So the base square footage of these units is increasing from about 1,621 square feet to almost 1,900 square feet. And that's really the basic change in the architecture. And so this application is before you today for approval of revised architecture in accordance with staff's recommendation. And we concur with staff's findings and their proposed conditions with the one minor revision to condition 1A, which was set forth in applicant's exhibit number 1. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have regarding the application.
Thank you, Mr. Haller. Any questions for the applicant, commissioners? Mr. Haller or the applicant itself or members of the team? No questions. All right. There's no one else who signed up to speak on this item. I'm going to close the hearing. And commissioners, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the findings of staff and approve BSP-20054-01, along with the conditions as outlined in staff's report and as further modified by applicant exhibit number 1.
Second.
All right, we got a motion by Commissioner Washington, a second by Commissioner Dorner, I believe. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I will call the roll. Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horowitz. Thank you, Mr. Haller. And thank you, Mr. Huang again.
Thank you very
We will
much.
now move on to item 8 on our agenda. This is a DSP 20032 edition of Signature Club at Manning Village. We have Mr. Gibbs, who's representing the applicant. Mr. Shelley will give the staff presentation. We have a number of folks signed up to speak as well, who are all part of the applicant's team. This is an evidentiary hearing, so if any of them speak, I'll need to swear them in. Mr. Gibbs, are you expecting to have folks speak, or do you want to just swear them in case they answer questions?
You can do that, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Edward Gibbs, an attorney on behalf of the applicant and owner in this case. And we do have a number of folks with us today, but we really don't anticipate even any questions. We are really at one with staff.
We'll swear them in if they are asked questions, and they'll be speaking. Otherwise, let's turn to Mr. Shelley for the staff presentation.
Usually, Mr. Chair, sorry, real quick, for the record, James Hunt with the Development Review Division. I want to make a quick statement here. Of course, I got to be the bearer of the bad news today. Unfortunately, today is the last planning board day for Mr. Andrew Shelley. He has tomorrow will be his last day with the commission. I wanted to take a moment and to say before everyone how great and appreciative we are of all his hard work. He came on about a year ago. And typically, most planners, when they come on board, it's going to take a little while to kind of get your feet acclimated with all the different regulations and policies that are associated within the planning field. Mr. Shelley ran with it. As soon as he got on board, he ran with it. If you all recall, within the first couple of months, he was coming before you all with planning board cases. And he's done that before both your body as well as the district council, and has done a phenomenal job. So I wanted to take a moment and recognize Mr. Shelley for all his hard work and thank him for everything that he's done for the commission and the department. He's really stepped up and done a great job, and want to congratulate him on all his future endeavors and good fortune as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hunt. And Mr. Shelley, that's sad news to hear. You really have done a great job. It's been great to work with you. I hope you're on to great things, and I would echo everything that Mr. Hunt said. Thank you for everything that you've done.
Well, thank you both so much. Just doing a quick sound check here. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning Board. For the record, I'm Andrew Shelley with the Urban Design Section. Item number 8 is detailed site plan DSP-20032 for addition to Signature Club at Manning Village, which seeks to develop 76 single-family attached townhouse dwelling units, of which 4 are live/work units. As a matter of housekeeping, the applicant has provided a revised conditions memorandum titled Applicant Exhibit 1 and supporting documentation titled Applicant Exhibit 2 and Applicant Exhibit 3 prior to the hearing deadline on October 31st, 2023. In a response to Applicant Exhibit 1, staff prepared a memorandum titled Staff Exhibit 1. Staff Exhibit 1 demonstrates that staff are in agreement with the applicant's proposed revised conditions with minor technical corrections. Based on evaluation and analysis, urban design staff recommend that the planning board adopt the findings of this report and approve detailed site plan DSP-20032 and type 2 tree conservation plan TCP2-033-2023, subject to the recommended conditions of approval within the technical staff report and the revised conditions provided by the applicant in Applicant Exhibit 1 and modified by staff in Staff Exhibit 1. This concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shelley. Commissioners, any questions, or would you just like to give Mr. Shelley a really hard time since he's leaving? No?
It sounds like
There's no questions. We will turn to the applicant, Mr. Gibbs. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Board. Once again, Edward Gibbs, an attorney with offices in Largo, and I'm very pleased to be here today representing Signature Land Holdings LLC, the owner and the applicant, and the principal member and owner of that limited liability company is, of course, Caruso Homes, who was the primary and is the primary developer of the 313 residential units forming the basis of the primary Signature Club community located just to the west of this land area, which is the addition to Signature Club. First, I'd just like to note for the record that we don't have any opposition here today, and I would note for the Planning Board's edification that prior and leading up to this hearing today, we met with the Accokeek Development Review District Commission, and we also had a special meeting with the residents of the larger Signature Club community located to the west northwest of these two parcels, and so everyone in the neighborhood has a clear understanding of what's happening here, and this is just really an expansion of their community onto these two adjoining parcels, as was originally envisioned. I want to thank Mr. Shelley for all of his assistance, not just in this case, but in every case I have had the absolute pleasure to work with him. He is a true professional. The commission will dearly miss his services, his expertise, his dedication, and his willingness to solve problems when he handles cases. So it's just been an absolute pleasure for me to work with him personally and on behalf of numerous clients in the short time he has been here. And I wish him nothing but the best moving forward. I'd also like to thank Mr. Shelley for the memorandum that he produced as a result of looking at our proposed revisions to the conditions. We agree with everything he has said in that memorandum, and we would embrace those as part of our proposed changes. So with that having been said, I will conclude my comments and be happy to answer any questions. One thing I should say as well, there's a revision regarding a change to the landscape plan that results from the location of the 4 live work units on the smaller parcel that you see outlined in red on the aerial photograph. There are some townhomes that are directly behind where those 4 live work units are located. Those townhomes are part of the parent Signature Club development, the 313 units. And so we received a call from Ms. Karita Parks. She lives in one of those units. And she asked my client if they would be willing to perhaps change the landscape plan slightly and change the limit of disturbance line in order to retain some existing mature trees on our property behind those units. And Ms. Parks felt that would provide even better screening with those mature trees. And so my client had our civil engineer Dewberry send a survey crew out staked the line and then met with Ms. Parks in the field, and they came to a resolution that would provide more and greater protection in terms of the view shed from her unit and those of the other units joining hers in that area. And that resulted in the change in the landscaping conditions. So while we're removing some things from the landscaping plan, what we're doing in exchange is going to create a much better situation for the residents of those units abutting the live work units. I just wanted to make that clarification as well. And with that being said, I'll conclude my comments. And once again, many thanks to Mr. Shelley.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbs. Appreciate that. Commissioners, any questions for the applicant on this item? No questions. We have nobody signed up to speak for this evidentiary hearing, so I will close the hearing. And commissioners, if there's no deliberation, I would look for action.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the findings of staff and the findings as modified by applicant exhibit number 1 and as further modified by staff exhibit number 1, and approve DSP-20032 and TCP2-033-2023, along with the conditions as outlined in staff's report and is amended by applicant exhibit number 1 and is further modified by staff exhibit number 1.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Washington, second by Vice Chair Bailey. Discussion? Call the roll, Commissioner.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to wish Mr. Shelley well, and it's been a short time, but I continue to wish you the best in your future endeavors. You'll be missed.
Indeed. Commissioner Washington, call the roll.
Vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey?
Mr. Shelley, you will be missed, and best wishes, and I vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner?
But good luck, Mr. Shelley. I hope you're very successful in the next endeavor.
Yeah, I'll vote aye as well, and I would join the sentiments with all my commissioners as well to you, Mr. Shelley. You guys have it 4-0. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Gibbs and your team. And again, Mr. Shelley, thank you for all your hard work and your professionalism.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on our agenda is item 9. This is a preliminary plan of subdivision 4-22064 Woodside Village, Westphalia Meadows. We have Mr. Haller. This is an evidentiary hearing as well. I don't see anybody else signed up to speak beyond members of the applicant's team. Mr. Haller, same thing. If any of your folks are asked questions, we'll swear them in. Is that okay with you?
Yes, that is fine, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Folks, I need to ask a favor. I need to take a 5-minute break. So even though we're right at the front end of this one, let's take 5 minutes, and it's 10:40. We'll start up again at 10:45, okay? Without any objection, let's keep going. I've introduced the case. This is an evidentiary hearing, but we'll only swear people in as needed. We have Mr. Howell representing the applicant, and we have Mr. Heath who will give the staff presentation. So, Mr. Heath, I'll turn it over to you. The floor is yours.
Chair, members of the board, for the record, Antoine Heath with the subdivision section. Item 9 is a
Mr. Heath, Mr. Heath, we can hear you, but you're very faint, very, very faint. Okay. Maybe even as simple as moving the microphone closer to your face. Your mouth.
All right, I'll start over. Can you hear me better now?
A little better.
Okay, I'll speak up. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. For the record, Antoine Heath with the subdivision section. Item 9 is a preliminary plan of subdivision for 4-22064 Woodside Village, Westphalia Meadows, which proposes 282 lots and 29 parcels for the development of 268 single-family attached dwellings and 14 single-family detached dwellings. All information regarding this preliminary plan of subdivision has been stated in the staff report, and staff is recommending approval with conditions. This application is supported by and subject to certificate of adequacy ADQ-2022-077, which was approved with conditions on October 26, 2023. The applicant submitted proposed revisions to conditions prior to the Tuesday 12 p.m. deadline. These revisions can be found in the additional backup as Applicant's Exhibit 1, and staff is in full agreement with these revisions. This concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heath. And by the end of that, we can hear you fine, by the way. Are there any questions for staff? No questions. I'll turn to the applicant, Mr. Haller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, again, and members of the board. Thomas Haller on behalf of the applicant in this case. Before I begin, I do want to thank Mr. Hunt for mentioning Mr. Shelley and his leaving. I want to echo Mr. Gibbs' comments about what a pleasure it's been to work with Mr. Shelley, and we wish him also the best of luck into the future. So thank you for the opportunity to make that comment. We have several representatives of our development team here. If there are any questions, we have Mr. Dan Jackson with Stanley Martin Homes, Mr. Nat Ballard and Rob Swam with Rogers Consulting, and also Mike Lenhart with Lenhart Traffic Consulting on this application. We're moving forward with the development approvals for this property. This 63-acre property, if you may recall, and as outlined in the staff report, was part of the original Woodside Village comprehensive design zone project that contained 381 acres. But after 140 acres were conveyed to Park and Planning several years ago, a separate basic plan was approved for this property and for the remaining property under private ownership. And this property has, in addition to the revision to the basic plan, has also received approval of a comprehensive design plan. So the property that is before you today has been subject to several previous approvals, and the application is consistent with the approved comprehensive design plan. We concur with the recommendations of staff and staff proposed conditions with the minor revision to condition 19 that's set forth in applicant's Exhibit 1, and we're happy to answer any questions the board has regarding the application.
Thank you, Mr. Haller. Commissioners, any questions for the applicant on this case? Seeing no questions, we have no one else who signed up to speak. This is an evidentiary hearing, which I will close. And unless there's any deliberation, commissioners, I would look for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move approval of case number 422064 with all conditions and revised conditions, with also TCP 1002-2023-01, also variance from section 25.122B1G, and variations from section 24.128B74. Move approval.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Yeah, just for clarification, I think it's 24. I think the variations from the last one is from section 24-128B7A, not 4.
7A. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a motion and a second. Ms. Tellerico, is that okay? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would add that make sure we're referencing applicant's Exhibit 1 for the revised conditions in the motion, and that would be good. Yes.
Okay. Is the maker of the motion, second motion, okay with that?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. So noted.
I just made it back. Sorry.
You missed the fun already. The motion and a second on this item. Motion by Vice Chair Bailey, the second by Commissioner Dorner. We have a quorum, Commissioner Washington, so you don't need to take action. Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I will call the roll. Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Washington, anything?
Abstain.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it. 3 ayes and 1 abstention. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Heath, and thanks again, Mr. Howard.
Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Okay, next item on our agenda is item 10. This is a remand by the District Council for a detailed site plan, DSP 21001, Suffrage Point. Just a note, this case was approved at the Planning Board meeting of February 2nd, 2023, remanded by the District Council on April 24th, 2023, and continued from the October 5th, 2023 Planning Board meeting. We have Mr. Rivera who's representing the applicant. We also have Ms. Giles and Mr. Monty, I think it's pronounced, from DPI, who can answer some technical questions that there might be as well. There are some additional exhibits that have been added to the record from both the applicant and the opposition. One, just to be clear, one, Sustainable Hyattsville, I believe, is the one where there was an email of a Dropbox link, but staff was unable to locate any documents in the link, which was filed just a minute or two before the deadline. So that information will not be included in the record. This is an evidentiary hearing, so I'm going to require all those intending to provide testimony to take an oath to be sworn in. Before I do that, I just want to reiterate what's happening today, because I know there's a fair bit going on. There's a lot of folks who are going to be speaking as well. So the reminder for this is that this is a remand hearing for DSP 21001 Suffers Point. As will be noted in the technical staff report, the District Council's order of remand found that the Planning Board's decision was based on and their interpretation was based on three legal errors. One was improper reliance on an invalid floodplain waiver from DPI. The second, there's insufficient evidence to support the board's findings that floodplain impacts had been approved by DPI because the floodplain waiver was invalid. And then the third, lack of substantial evidence for the finding that the 41 proposed single-family attached dwelling units complied with a maximum permitted density for the subject property. So these are the legal errors according to the District Council. These are the legal errors that the Planning Board has been directed to reopen the record and accept testimony and evidence limited to issues related to those. So it's limited to the applicant was permitted to either withdraw or resubmit DSP 21001. Any resubmitted DSP was to contain a new floodplain waiver from DPI. Evidence of all federal and state permits required to commence with any development of the proposed project, and a worksheet explaining the density calculation. We are only accepting testimony and evidence related to these limited items. So testimony and evidence not related to the remand items listed in the District Council's order, they're not before the board, and we're not considering those. That does not mean that I'm going to spend, I will, wield the gavel with some bit of flexibility. So I'm sure that folks will have other things that they want to say as well. But note that we'll provide some latitude, but not a lot of latitude, because what is before us is quite limited. I've asked our counsel, our associate counsel, Ms. Telrico, Mr. Warner, I've asked them to jump in if they feel that things are getting too far afield to assist me with that as well. And commissioners, I hope that is clear with what we are dealing with here. Yeah, any questions about what's before us broadly before we get into it? Okay, good. So now, as is our practice, actually before that, I'm going to ask folks to be sworn in. So anyone who's planning on speaking, ideally, if you could turn your camera on so I can see you, raise your right hand. You don't have to, it's not a requirement. But I'm going to ask everybody who's planning on testifying to be sworn in. So please come online if you can and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that your testimony will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Others? Ms. Simmons, yes. I got you sworn in? Okay. Okay, Ms. Giles? We need to swear in Ms. Giles? Can't hurt to swear in Ms. Giles, right? Okay, great. So that's it. I'll ask if folks have been sworn in as they are planning on speaking. And if I missed anybody, we'll swear them in at that time. We'll start with the staff presentation. That's Ms. Kozak. And then we'll hear from the applicant. And then we will turn to folks from the public who have signed up to speak. And when we get to that point, I'll actually go through the list and just make sure I'm not missing anybody, okay? So start with Ms. Kozak, take it away.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, great. For the record, my name is Jill Kozak with the Urban Design section. The item before you is number 10, the remand of DSP 21001 for Suffrage Point. The DSP proposes to develop 41 single-family attached dwelling units on the lower parcel of the project, formerly known as Magruder Point. Staff is recommending approval with conditions for the remand of DSP 21001. Additionally, as the chair noted, Mary Giles from DPI is present today to answer any questions the board may have relative to issues which are within DPI's purview, such as the floodplain waiver. I will first provide a brief overview of the application before focusing on the remand points. Next slide, please. The site is located in Planning Area 68 in Council District 2 and is within the municipal limits of the city of Hyattsville. Next slide, please. The subject DSP is for what is known as the lower parcel of the Suffrage Point property, which is located between 40th Place and Driscoll Park. Next slide, please. The subject property is in the current RSF 65 zone. The property was previously in the R55 zone as rezoned via the approved conceptual site plan CSP 18002. Next slide, please. The subject property is currently not in any overlay zones. However, under the prior zoning ordinance, which this DSP is adhering to, the property is within the traditional residential neighborhood character area of the Gateway Arts District Sector Plan and SMA Development District Overlay Zone, as shown on the right. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The aerial shows the site is vacant and was previously cleared and graded pursuant to the approved DSP 18005, which included infrastructure development of the lower parcel. The site has little slope and was largely in the existing floodplain. The entire Suffrage Point property is exempt from the Woodland Conservation Ordinance as it has less than 10,000 square feet of woodland on site and had no previously approved tree conservation plans. Next slide, please. Not sure if I'm getting a lag. Next slide. Oh, okay. Please move to the next slide. 8, please.
Slide 8, please. There we go.
Thank you. This map shows the adjacent master plan rights-of-way, which includes Hamilton Street, which is a collector roadway to the west. Next slide, please. This enlarged aerial shows the infrastructure development that has already occurred on the property pursuant to DSP 18005. Next slide, please. The subject DSP proposes development of the lower 4.66 acre parcel with 41 single-family attached dwelling units. The layout and development amount is consistent with the approved preliminary plan of subdivision 4-21052 and conceptual site plan CSP 18002. The proposed 41 single-family attached dwellings are located in 2 rows, one fronting the public roads to the east and one fronting the parkland to the west, with an intervening parcel for compensatory floodplain storage. A 22-foot wide public alley, which provides access to the garages, runs between the townhouse rows and has an access point at either end off of Gallatin Street and the other off of 40th Place. Parcel C, located in the upper left-hand corner, and D, located in the middle left side of the image, are proposed to be dedicated to the city of Hyattsville, as they requested, to accommodate existing and future improvements on Driscoll Park. Parcel B2 in the lower left corner of the property will be used mainly for compensatory floodplain storage and will be owned by the HOA. Next slide, please. The submitted landscape plan. Oh, no, 11 is fine. Yeah.
Your 11 is fine.
The submitted landscape plan demonstrates conformance to all applicable DDO landscape standards, as was required in the approval of CSP 18002, and to the tree canopy coverage ordinance with 15% tree canopy in proposed plantings on site. Next slide, please. The submitted viewshed exhibit shows the relationship of the proposed townhouses on the right with Driscoll Park on the left, with the compensatory floodplain storage on parcel B2 in between. Next slide, please. The DSP includes two proposed, this image shows an illustrative rendering of the development from the park property, showing the change in elevation and proposed architecture. Next slide, please. DSP includes two proposed architectural models. However, we will just quickly move through these architecture slides as the remand order did not contain any issues or points regarding the architecture. So if you could slowly flip through to slide 20, I believe. The next slide. Yeah. And then just finally, this slide shows potential interpretive signage on the property. This again was not an issue discussed in the order of remand. So the next slide, please. Here we have the remand points in their order of remand dated May 16th, 2023. The District Council ordered the Planning Board to reopen the record and take further testimony or evidence relevant to 5 specific points, which are written out here. In a letter dated August 7th, 2023, which starts on page 38 of the backup, the applicant provided a response to these points. Additionally, in a letter dated July 25th, 2023, Abraham to Dernoga, which starts on page 71 of the backup, DPI provided a response to the District Council to the remand points relative to the issues which are within their purview, such as the floodplain waiver. Staff's memo dated October 17th, 2023 gives a summary of the responses to the remand points. The first 3 points are relevant to the floodplain on the property. Point number 1 allows the applicant to withdraw the site plan. However, the applicant chose in the alternative to proceed as allowed per remand point number 2. In response to point 2, DPI issued a revised approved floodplain waiver letter dated July 25th, 2023, which starts on page 51 of the backup. Per remand point 3, DPI's revised decision on the waiver makes all required findings and considerations in Prince George's County Code, section 32-206 D through J, D and J, as amended by CB 38-2016, and DPI found that there will be no homes constructed within the 100-year floodplain and no construction in a FEMA designated floodway. In addition, DPI noted that the original floodplain waiver was based upon the current Prince George's County Code, but did contain a clerical error. No revision to the site plan is required to comply with the revised floodplain waiver letter. Per remand point 4, the applicant submitted evidence that the project has received all required federal and state permits to date. They also submitted documentation of all inspections indicating no on-site work violations currently. Additionally, documentation from the Maryland Department of the Environment indicated that the required non-tidal wetland and waterway authorization and a general permit for the discharge of construction stormwater can only be issued following the DSP approval, as required by MDE regulations. Upon review of this, DPI indicated that they will not issue any new grading or building permits for the floodplain portion of the property until the developer secures the required MDE permit, which can only happen following the DSP approval. Remand point 5 requires the applicant to include a density calculation explaining the net lot acreage or net tract acreage of the lower parcel that is subject to be developed. The applicant submitted a supplemental memorandum dated September 27th, 2023, which starts on page 155 of the backup, which includes this explanation. The applicant chose to use net tract acreage, which per the zoning ordinance definition requires only the 100-year floodplain and land that has been dedicated, donated, or otherwise conveyed to be subtracted from the gross tract area. As discussed in the applicant's memo, no land has been dedicated, donated, or otherwise conveyed at this time. Therefore, the net tract area is the gross tract acreage of 4.66 acres minus the 1.29 acres of proposed floodplain area per the DPI approved revised floodplain waiver. This results in a net tract area of 3.37 acres and a density of 12.17 dwelling units per net tract acre. This formula is the same as was used in approving DSP 21001 originally. Next slide, please. With that, the urban design section recommends that the planning board adopt the findings in the additional staff memo and reapprove DSP 21001 for Suffrage Point and issue an amendment to resolution 2023-15 with no new conditions. However, there is one technical correction staff would like to point out. The prior condition 3 in the resolution will have to be revised to refer to condition 12 instead of condition 11 within the approved revised floodplain compensatory storage waiver. The number just changed with the revised approved waiver. So again, with that, staff would recommend the board reapprove DSP 21001. And this concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kozak. Commissioners, questions for staff? None at this point? Okay, thank you, Ms. Kozak, much appreciated. Now turn to the applicant, Mr. Rivera. If you could introduce yourself for the record and members of your team as appropriate, and the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, participants, staff.
Mr. Chairman?
Somebody speaking?
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Greg Smith. I was hoping to ask Ms. Kozak some questions on cross. Is that, should I do it now or would you like to wait?
That's a good question. Mr. Warner, let me ask you, or Ms. Tallarico, let me ask your advice on this. When is the most appropriate time to give the opposition a chance to cross?
David Warner, Principal Counsel. Thank you, Chairman. The appropriate time to cross is after the testimony given by a witness. In this case, the staff has given what we don't consider testimony, but we have permitted cross in the past. So cross would be appropriate right now for Mr. Smith if he'd like to, as long as it's, of course, kept within our procedural requirements.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. Smith. So Mr. Rivera, hold the point. And Mr. Smith, if you could introduce yourself for the record, you haven't sworn in correctly, correct?
Yes, I raised my hand and agreed when you asked for us to testify under oath.
All right, so take it away with cross. And again, cross-examination, as you know, is related to items that Ms. Kozak brought to us when she was speaking a few minutes ago.
Okay, a few questions here. Referring to several of the slides in Ms. Kozak's or the staff's PowerPoint, shows the boundary of the property extending into Magruder Woods Park and encompassing an adjacent residential property. It shows this on several slides. That appears to be an error, is it?
Which slide are you referring to? And Ms. Kozak certainly jump in, but which slide are you referring to?
It's at least on slide number 1, and it's on, I think it's on 2 or 3 other slides at least.
I do know that the slides, the red line that's outlined is approximate. The aerial does not always line up with property limits and that sort of thing. However, you know, the boundary that is shown on the site plan, which is reflective of the 4.66 gross acres, has been reviewed and verified by staff as being the correct limits of the property. I excuse if there's any, you know, overlap or shift in that in the images shown here.
Okay, my next question, thank you, Ms. Kozak. My next question is, you referred to the waiver request that Worldline had submitted to DPI. Is that waiver request and all of the supporting documentation in the record for public review and for the planning board to review? And was it provided in a timely way for public review, if it is?
The DPI approved floodplain waiver letter is in the backup for this case, for this hearing today. And it was, I believe, originally published online at least 2 weeks prior to today, if not prior to that.
Well, that wasn't my question, Ms. Kozak. I asked whether or not Worldline's application, the request for the floodplain waiver letter and the supporting documentation upon which DPI supposedly relied is in the record, and was it made available in a timely way for the public to review? These are fairly technical documents. So are they or are they not?
Mr. Chair, I can step in here and answer that. Ms. Kozak answered the question. Everything related to the waiver was in the record at least 2 weeks prior to this hearing. So that answered.
Well,
that
Mr.
question's
Warner,
been answered.
I have to disagree here. And I did. She said that she specifically said that the waiver letter itself, and there's a floodplain study, I know that, or at least parts of a floodplain.
Mr.
But my question is whether the application.
Hold on, please.
My question,
Mr. Smith,
my question is
the
whether
cross-examination relates to the items for this remand. This item regarding the waiver letter is what Mr. Shapiro, the chair, said the condition requires the planning board to receive. And Ms. Kozak told you that the waiver letter is in the record 2 weeks ahead of time. So
and I've
that's
asked
the
a question,
answer.
and I've
Whether
asked
you disagree or not is not part of cross-examination. You're just asking questions, not giving opinions. Thank you.
Mr. Warner, I asked a question whether the application that Worldline or Dewberry submitted to DPI and a supporting document are in the record. I didn't ask whether or not the waiver letter is in the record. I asked whether the application of supporting documents were made available for public review. It's a yes or no.
But again, the waiver letter is
this is well within the scope of this hearing. This is
not
well
whatever application they might have submitted to DPI. Okay. So
Okay,
just narrow your questions to what the issues are here at remand. Thank you.
Since you're not saying yes, this is well within the scope of the remand. It's essential information for the public to be able to review and provide comments on.
Mr. Smith, the one thing I would say
yes to be documented, I'll assume the answer is no.
Mr.
Okay,
Smith.
let's just go ahead and move on.
Mr. Smith, keep in mind that these are things, you have opinions about these things, but when you ask and the question is answered, you may disagree with the answer, but it is still asked and answered.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shapiro. I'll move on. I believe Ms. Kozak said at one point that Worline had obtained all the required state federal permits. And then she went on to say something that contradicted that. So I want some clarity on this. At one point, Ms. Kozak, you said they had all the required state federal permits. And at another point, you said that MDE has informed you all that they will not issue 2 required permits until or unless there's a DSP approved. Can you just explain the contradiction here? Because there have been other hearings in the past where Mr. Rivera and planning staff have claimed that Worline had all the required permits when they clearly did not. And you can look on MDE's website and find that they don't. So could you provide some clarity, the contradiction between those 2 statements, that allegedly they have all the required permits, but MDE won't issue them until unless there's an approved DSP?
Ms. Kozak?
Yes, I'm sorry. I had said that they had received all required permits to date as of today. And then I clarified that it is standard MDE operating procedure not to issue those specific permits until final zoning approval is approved, which is essentially this detailed site plan. So their operating procedure is not to issue those final permits until the detailed site plan is approved.
So
and once that is approved, then they will issue those.
So just a point of clarification, it sounds like you're saying that Worline had all the authorizations it needed prior to regrading and stripping and excavating on the lower parcel. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying what would have happened in the past. I'm saying as of today, they have what they need, exclusive of these permits, which can only happen after the detailed site plan is approved.
Okay. At any point in your review of, I'm assuming that after we raised these issues in the past about the adequacy or the accuracy of the waiver letter and related matters, that you might have taken a close look at this particular waiver letter and supporting floodplain study. At any point, did you determine whether or not they used recent climate and precipitation data to determine to inform the decisions?
You're asking whether staff did that?
Yeah, I'm asking whether we've raised this issue repeatedly at hearings before. In fact, going all the way back to July 2018 as to whether or not these delineations and these approvals take climate change into account. And it was a core issue in our testimony before you and before the district council on this DSP. And it's a critical issue. It's completely appropriate. And so I'm asking whether or not, in reviewing the adequacy of the documents that they are relying on and making recommendations to this board, whether planning staff went back and took our concerns, our legitimate concerns, into account and asked and tried to ascertain whether or not the waiver letter and the supporting documents and the delineations take climate change into account.
So let me say,
and that's my question, because we have put on the record the fact that
Mr. Smith.
Okay, so it's just a yes or no question.
If you continue to interrupt me, then we're going to take a recess until you can figure out how to just contain yourself so we can conduct this in a civil manner.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was trying to finish my question and frame it in a way that might be clear. That's all I was doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. So I'm happy to hear from staff on this, but what is before staff, I'm not hearing that it is within staff's purview to take broadly defined climate change into account as you make your decisions. You have rules and regs before you that you are required to adhere to. So that's my interpretation of that question. But Ms. Kozak or Mr. Warner or Mr. Hunt, please weigh in as well, or even Ms. Giles.
Mr. Chair, for the record, James.
Recall that. Oh. I'm sorry, James. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, David. That's fine.
Just point of clarification. Recall that cross-examination is only on things that Ms. Kosak said. She said there's a waiver letter here. She didn't claim to have start down a list of all of the analysis in that waiver letter. And just to move things along, fortunately today we do have Ms. Giles here from the department that prepared the waiver letter that has all that expertise. So really, to get to the answer that Mr. Smith is seeking, when we hear Ms. Giles' testimony, that'll be the right person or from the applicant to really answer those questions. Ms. Kosak didn't talk about any of the specifics in the waiver letter in terms of what was analyzed and what wasn't.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, Mr. Smith, I would agree with what Mr. Warner said. We'll hear from Ms. Giles, and I'll give you the opportunity to answer questions as well of Ms. Giles. Want to make sure you have that opportunity, but that feels more relevant to me because as far as Ms. Kosak is concerned, I feel like your question was asked and answered. But please continue, Mr. Smith.
I'll go ahead and wrap it up there, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So any more cross? Do we, Mr. Warner, help me with our own procedures. Do we allow Mr. Rivera to have cross if he chooses as well?
If you wanted to cross staff, sure, certainly, yeah. The idea behind cross-examination is that it's best done right after the person makes testimony, so the questions tie together. So that's how we do it.
All right, Mr. Rivera, any cross?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have the staff presentation. I also advise Mr. Warner, I do want to hear from Ms. Giles, and I'm trying to think of when it makes the most sense to hear from Ms. Giles, if she has anything to present, or Ms. Giles, do you just want to be available for questions?
I'm available for questions.
Okay, so we'll leave it at that. There may be questions from us commissioners as we go along. I imagine there'll be questions from folks in the public as well, which I feel is appropriate. So we'll do that. So we've heard from staff. We'll now turn to the applicant, Mr. Rivera. Back to you. Please introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, staff, and guests. For the record, Norman Rivera, attorney in Bowie, representing the applicant in this case. I'm glad the chair and Mr. Warner and others have set the table, if you will, for what we're here for today. So not to belabor the point, but under the Zimmer case, if the district council remands an item back to the planning board for certain items, it's only the planning board's job is to just really address those 5 points. That was one of the slides on the screen that Ms. Kosak presented. In her report, she has gone through each of those 5 items in detail. And I would remind the board, as you already know, that this DSP was already approved back in February, and that is what was remanded back to the planning board, but basically to address the floodplain waiver and related matters, which again are not part of the review of a DSP under 27-285. The staff report prior issued, as well as your resolution, clearly indicates where the findings are and how the staff and the evidence presented meets those requirements. So that is kind of the base for the remand, because otherwise there wouldn't be anything to remand. So with that, I just wanted to concur with you and your staff about the limit of the remand. We submitted a letter September 27th, 2023, our response to the 5 points of the remand, which Ms. Kosak had reviewed. And there's certain elements in there I just wanted to touch upon. The district council on May 8th, when they actually voted to remand the case, was concerned about how they couldn't figure out the density and the methodology of how to do that. So in Exhibit 8 of my submission on September 27th, there's a letter from Dewberry, our planning and engineering firm, that indicates how you get from gross acres minus the net acre of floodplain to equal what's the net acres times 12.3. So we have evidence in the file. Ms. Giles has reviewed it. They issued their letters on July 25th, 23, in response to the request to issue a new floodplain waiver according to the current code. And although the first letter in 18 was reviewed according to that current code, there was a clerical error in that there was an attachment from a prior ordinance. But the criteria I cited when I filed the request and the Dewberry folks filed and what DPI reviewed is up to snuff in conformance with Subtitle 32. So it's clear that they have reevaluated everything for the district council's request, and the net acreage is the gross 4.66 minus the floodplain, which is 1.29, and that is clearly indicated in the Dewberry letter of 5/11/23, Exhibit 8. So I just want to make that clear because there's some consternation at the district council. They're not used to doing these calculations, so it was a little bit tough for them to do so. The other point they were confused about on density and net acres is that you can only deduct roads that already exists or any donations like a conveyance to an open space or something. So there's nothing been dedicated because we can't do that yet. We have to have the DSP, which then goes to record plat. But that calculation is done at preliminary plan, which has already been approved with 4-21052, the DSP back in February. So I think that issue is settled, but I'm glad we're having this discussion so that I could put that into the record for later use at the district council. I know you know what you all did the right thing at the staff's level, but I have to make that clear for the record. There was no dedication. It's just the floodplain, and that was documented in our methodology submitted to DPI that they reviewed to come up with their July 25th letter. With respect to Mr. Smith had filed a letter of October 31st, 2 days ago, citing many things. And I think when you read that, you'll see that 90% of it is not relevant to the remand in the 5 points. He's talking about climate change, which you just mentioned, Mr. Chair. That's not part of the staff's review. He's mentioning that FEMA has bad maps, bad methodology. That's not before the staff or the board. He's mentioning precipitation counts. All of that is out of bounds of the remand. And even if it wasn't a remand, it's still out of bounds as the criteria for approval of a DSP. They're very specific regulatory items that we all have to adhere to. So for that matter, I think you can only give it the weight it deserves. He did talk about density as the only thing I could see that related to the remand. And I just spoke about it, and Ms. Kosak spoke about it, and the prior resolutions and approvals by the board also speak to that. So I think that issue should be settled, but it has to go on to the district council. Let's see what else I have here. I really don't have much to add, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I just wanted to say that the record is complete. I'm glad that letter was struck. The letter I had filed was not relevant to the DSP either, so that's my fault. It's related to possible flooding issues in this area. But again, it's not in scope of the remand as evidenced by the Zimmer case. What else do I have? With that, really, that is our presentation. I'm not going to argue with what already DPI said, what the staff said. We thought it was settled. This is really the council's request of the staff. And as the chair said back on October 5th, I think the duty of the board to this particular kind of a case is to gather the evidence, transmit it to the district council so they can review it and make their own decision. But you're the hearing of record. You have original jurisdiction. And that in Zimmer is a huge point, as well as what the scope of an appeal is, has to be limited to what was reviewed. So with that, I would urge that you adopt the recommendations for the transmission of the record, and then I'll be happy to react to the comments by the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. And now, typically, we do not allow cross for attorneys, but since Mr. Rivera is the only one who's been speaking on behalf of the applicant, I want to, Mr. Warner, unless you strongly object, I want to, if Mr. Smith has any cross for the applicant's team, I would allow that. Mr. Smith, I don't know if you have. You're on mute, Mr. Smith.
Good.
I can't tell if that's a yes or no.
I have
we'll
a question. This is
Ms.
Al.
Cole.
Hi.
Ms. Cole, you were sworn in, correct?
I'm sorry.
You were sworn in?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
My
If you could
question
introduce
here.
yourself for the record, too.
Oh, thank you. My name is Allison Cole. I'm a board member of Sustainable Hyattsville, but speaking on different issues than the comments submitted. Just for Mr. Rivera, what part of the Zimmer case speaks to the planning board's purview on remand? It actually does. My understanding is that it doesn't speak to that at all, so I'd like to hear about that.
I have the case right here. I think it's question presented number 4. And the Honorable Glenn Harold wrote a very great opinion covering the whole waterfront of planning and zoning. He basically defined that what the district council's role is by the land use article. The planning board clearly is the hearing of record. When the district council sends the case back down, they have to cite specific items that have to be addressed by the lower body, which has happened in this case. So I'll have to find the page.
Yes.
It does about remand.
But in what way does the district council's order on remand limit the authority of the lower body? Because I can talk about this in my testimony. I just wanted to sort of correct.
It's a little hard to understand, but it's really the district council directs the planning board, because on a remand they have to indicate exactly what they're looking for. You can't just remand it for a brand new hearing. So when they remand a case, it's for specific issues, whether it be traffic or in this case, the floodplain waiver. So when the planning board hears it, they're limited to those questions asked by the council. So it's really quite simple. They ask this question, after review it, planning board reviews it,
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Additional cross, Mr. Smith, you would cross? You're on mute, Mr. Smith.
I'm sorry, yes. I do have some questions for Mr. Rivera. Mr. Rivera, you, in your density calculation that you want us all to rely on, you know that the code defines density as gross acres minus the floodplain minus any streets, alleys, or other public ways. In your previous plans, Worline has shown that lower parcel alley as dedicated public right-of-way. All right, yeah, well, so I'll rephrase that and then I'll go back to that point. Are you considering the lower alley public or private right-of-way at this point? For the sake of your density calculation.
For the sake of the density calculation, whether they're public or private, they have not been dedicated, donated, or otherwise conveyed out of the tract, which is a literal quote from the definition of net tract area. That's distinguished from.
I'll go back. I think that net tract versus.
Mr. Smith, bear with me.
I do want to ask my questions to Mr. Shapiro.
Mr. Smith, bear with me. Hold. Mr. Warner, I just want your advice on this, because that level of detail, the question that Mr. Smith is asking, I did not hear that at all in what Mr. Rivera was saying. And so while I want to give Mr. Smith all the space in the world to talk about what he wants to talk about, this feels like too much detail for a cross. That's my reaction. But I don't know, Mr. Warner, I'd like to hear where you are on this.
Yeah, actually, Chairman David Warner, I didn't have any problem with that question, because it definitely falls within what Mr. Rivera submitted in his testimony and what he's referring to when he talks about it. And he's well qualified to answer that. It's a very simple question.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Smith, back to you.
Okay, so all right, let me phrase this another way. Mr. Rivera, what makes you think it's appropriate to rely on net tract area in this case versus net lot area when the definition of density in the zoning ordinance states that it's based upon the density is dwelling units per net lot area? What makes you think that that definition does not apply in this case?
The quarter pound that we have to use net acreage, which is the gross 4.66 minus 100-year floodplain, which is 1.29, as documented in our submission by Dewberry to DPI, which Ms. Giles and her team reviewed and approved and agreed with. We're not required to, the record would be 8,000 pages long if we submitted all the engineering. That's it's a ministerial act. Let me finish too, please. Ministerial act by DPI to review any submittal that is not normally part of the record. And in fact, the district council only said, DPI, you issue a new floodplain waiver letter. We are required as an applicant to fulfill the requirements for submittal of the information so they can do their job. And they have, and that really is the issue.
Yeah, I don't think you answered my question. I asked you what makes you believe that net tract is more appropriate than net lot, given the definition in the code. I didn't ask you about DPI's floodplain delineation, but let's move on. Again, in your calculation, does your calculation exclude the 0.4 acre that you have attributed, your client has attributed or allocated to the public alley on the lower parcel? Do you exclude that from the acreage in coming up with your density calculation?
That comes directly from the code. It's not my discretion to make that decision.
Are you saying that the code requires you to include the alleyway despite the definition set forth for density in the code?
Yes, because it literally says conveyed, donated, etc. Neither of those things has happened. In fact, the DSP has to be approved to go to record plat to create lots. So therefore, there's no net lot area because there's no lots. This is one big parcel that has preliminary plan, DSP.
Okay, so moving on, you've alleged that the evidence that we put in the record regarding the inadequacies of how floodplain maps are currently developed, and the fact that the precipitation data typically relied upon to delineate floodplains and design stormwater facilities and design compensatory mitigation. You said that all of that is irrelevant. Are you saying that understanding whether or not the agency has relied on current and accurate data is irrelevant to their floodplain delineation, the accuracy of their floodplain delineations? And are you saying, I'm sorry, let me finish my question, please. Okay. Are you saying that understanding whether that is so is irrelevant to understanding whether or not this floodplain delineation is accurate, or understanding what the impacts of this project might be on the environment and surrounding community?
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt here just to help with the cross-examination. Mr. Smith is free to ask those questions, but one of the things when you are conducting cross-examination is you're not allowed to ask compound questions with 3 or 4 different questions. So one question at a time is the appropriate approach.
All right. I'll back up. Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Warner. I appreciate it. Obviously, I'm a bit of a novice here. It's my understanding, this is my framing, it's my understanding that in looking at this DSP, or actually any other application before it, the planning board has an affirmative obligation to determine understand the impacts of the project on the community environment, and to make a determination as whether or not those impacts somehow comply with the goals set forth in the zoning ordinance and the general plan and the sector plan. Make an informed determination based upon the best available information. So you essentially have said that all the evidence that we've placed in the record for this hearing and the prior hearings about the potential environmental impacts and community impacts is,
Mr. Smith, I'm going to interrupt you.
is irrelevant. So here's my question. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Here's my question. Is
That's
that
a lot of
is that your assertion?
Question somewhere.
I'm sorry. Is that your assertion, Mr. Rivera, that understanding the environmental impacts is irrelevant to the planning board's decision here?
I didn't say that. I said that your statements in your letter of October 31st were largely irrelevant to the scope of the remand. You're diving into the analysis that a line agency makes when they review, as well as what Park and Planning does. The code dictates the issues on preliminary plan for regulated environmental features. At the same time, it's refined a DSP and again a building grading permit and building permit. Our stormwater management concept plans are all reviewed according to the data that is available. You use the term best available. You know, you're not going to check rainfall every day to see if the rain is what it is or what it is not. There are certain methodologies that they have to use that are industry standards, and that's what DPI does. We don't make up the standards. They review it, the data they request, and if they need more or less, they ask us for that, and that's what we do.
All right, let me come at this from a slightly different direction. We've put evidence in the record that basically the county and the state recognize climate change is a serious issue. And if you were to go to the climate action plan, go to the general plan, you would see that they're replete with recommendations to use the best available science. And they actually include statements about what has been happening and will happen. So we have a floodplain delineation developed by Dewberry for Worline. We've got DPI's floodplain waiver letter that's based upon Dewberry's floodplain study and delineation. And are you saying that, given the evidence we put in, that the kind of precipitation is usually depended on by engineers and agencies, the evidence we've placed on the record, this is evidence coming from publicly funded studies and from public agencies like NOAA, federal agency. Are you saying that it's not that? If I could finish my question.
Greg, when I speak, you have to stop speaking.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Everybody does. Sorry, I'm the chair. If I'm asking you to stop, you have to stop.
I'll just say may I finish my question?
I'm interrupting because you are not sticking with what's before us. I hear you loud and clear that you have a different opinion about this, but this is asked and answered. Mr. Rivera has made it clear that he is working with the established standards. Now, clear as day, you are making a point that you disagree with those established standards. I hear you, but it's asked and answered, and it's repetitive for you to continue to say that you are just disagreeing with the established standards. You want Mr. Rivera to say he disagrees with the established standards as well. You're not going to get that from him.
May I finish my questions, please?
Sure.
So I simply want a yes or no answer to this, Mr. Shapiro. And that is Mr. Rivera, are you asserting that the evidence that we've placed in the record about the deficiencies in these kinds of tools, floodplain maps and floodplain studies, the evidence is irrelevant to the planning board's consideration of the project's community environmental impacts?
I disagree with that statement. The planning board is not the agency with the expertise to make those determinations. DPI, MDE, FEMA, you're questioning their practices, their regulatory authority, their methodologies. That's not before us today. It's not covered in the remand. They didn't say, look behind everything. They said, give us a new floodplain waiver. Your opinion is that just that, with all due respect.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll go ahead and end my questions here.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any other cross for Mr. Rivera from anyone? No more cross. We'll now turn to the public. Let me just get the list of folks who decided to speak. I also want to talk about the timing of this, how much time we have. What we typically do is we will allot the opposition, such as it is, to have the same amount of time as the applicant. Mr. Rivera did not take a lot of time on his presentation. He took, according to my watch, he took 7 minutes. So I do not want to restrict all the folks who are planning on speaking in opposition to just 7 minutes, but I do want to manage the time tightly on this. So first, let me go through to see who we have. We have obviously Mr. Smith, we have Ms. Cole. I have a few other people signed up to speak. Ms. Simmons from the city of Hyattsville, I see you. We'll let you go first. We'll ask you to go first, Ms. Simmons. In addition, I have a Shanna Frickless. Ms. Frickless, are you there? I see your hand up, Mr. Smith. I'll get you in a second. Ms. Frickless, are you there? No? I have Irene Marsh. Ms. Marsh? No, Ms. Marsh. And I have Chris Curry. Mr. Curry, are you with us? No. Okay, so the only folks that I have who are here beyond Ms. Simmons, who represents the city of Hyattsville, are Mr. Smith and Ms. Cole. Sorry, Ms. Cole. So Mr. Smith and Ms. Cole, give me some sense of how you want to manage the time. I'll give you a little bit of latitude around this, but how much time do you think you need?
I'm sorry. I didn't hear what order you'd like to go in.
I'm going to start with Ms. Simmons, and then after that, Mr. Smith, you and Ms. Cole. I see you as the party in opposition, so we typically give you all the same amount of time the applicant took, which would be 7 minutes, but I want to give you a little bit more latitude if you need a little bit more time than that.
All right, if I may respond real quickly, we've dealt with this issue in past hearings. I mean, the role of the planning board, as I understand it, from speaking with other folks in legal law, is to conduct a full evidentiary hearing, not to make sure that each side gets something close to the same number of minutes. You're a fact-gathering body, and you're supposed to make your recommendation based on a full body of evidence. So I know you like to be expeditious in these hearings, but just because the applicant kept their presentation short shouldn't truncate our ability to put on our case.
I hear you disagreeing with the process, but this is the process that's laid out before us. So tell me roughly, if you need 10 or 15 minutes, I can give you 10 or 15 minutes.
Well, I think that could work, and I'll do my best to keep it tight and short and sweet, because we have put a lot of evidence on the record and we have addressed some of these points before.
Yeah, but I'm going to manage the time, Mr. Smith. So if you want up to 15 minutes, you have up to 15 minutes, and we'll set the clock at that, okay?
All right, I don't need to go first. If Ms. Cole others would like to go first, I can wrap up.
So what I'll do then, Ms. Cole, if that's all right with you, I'll start with Ms. Simmons. I'll then turn to you, Ms. Cole. We'll end with Mr. Smith. Ms. Simmons, as is our practice as representing the city of Hyattsville, she takes the time that she needs. And then for you, Mr. Smith and Ms. Cole, the two of you will have a combined up to 15 minutes, and we'll set the clock for that. But let me start with Ms. Simmons. If you could introduce yourself for the record, and the floor is yours. And you were sworn in, I saw before, so go ahead.
Chair Shapiro, before we jump to the city of Hyattsville, can I ask Mr. Rivera just some questions?
Who's speaking?
Commissioner Dorner.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure, Commissioner Dorner, I'm sorry. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I didn't chime in during cross because I figured I wasn't actually crossing any witnesses or anything, so I was just waiting.
You're part of the judging team, so you don't cross.
So what I want to go into, I don't know if the different reports that Mr. Rivera had submitted with like NTUs and different kinds of like runoff that was presumably used in the DeFi flood waiver analysis that was done in July. I don't know if that's in the record or if it's not, because I was unclear about what was stricken. So that was one thing I just wanted to hear a little bit more about, because those are some of the concerns I'd raised in February back in the initial hearing that we had for this DSP. The other question that I wanted to kind of prime you, Mr. Rivera, and then also maybe ask Ms. Giles for a little bit of clarification on is on MDE. So we have a lot in the backup, and I'm trying to kind of read through this and figure out some aspects of the floodplain waiver that were brought up today. It was mentioned that MDE is holding off on kind of their approval for this. They've got two permits. One is a non-tidal wetlands and waterways authorization, and the other one is a general permit for discharges of stormwater associated with construction activity. I'm more interested right now in the first one, although both are potentially important. But in the first one, the backup letter that we had from MDE, it basically said that they can't issue the authorization until the project complies with local zoning requirements. And that's where I'm just like, I don't think they're actually correct entirely. And that's why I'm sort of confused in terms of how we get to that point and how we can actually issue a valid floodplain waiver, knowing that this was done back originally in 2018, and now we have a new one in July. Because if you look back at COMAR, which is the state regulations for this, you've got 26/17/04/J. The state regulation is actually a little bit relaxed, and it says that the administration may, and I think the keyword may, refuse to process an application until the applicant is certified in writing that all the local land use requirements, including zoning and et cetera, that are necessary for that location have been satisfied. And it says, as the applicant, it's their responsibility to obtain state, federal, and local approvals that aren't addressed potentially in the regulation, which I think they're attempting to do. But obtaining the permit under this chapter doesn't relieve them from obtaining other permit approvals or other approvals just in general. So in that statement of may, I think it actually is within the MDE's ability and authority actually to issue it. So what I wanted to find out from Mr. Rivera was, between the approval in February, when you got the DSP approved, and before the district council actually called up the case, did you meet with MDE to try and talk with them or figure this out, or try and obtain that approval? Or maybe even after that hearing that remanded it to us, have you reached out to them to try and find out, would they approve it? Because there's sort of this chicken and the egg that I'm struggling with, is that if we approve this today, if you get the approval of our body, then all of a sudden MDE would allow it potentially to happen. However, the CSP says we cannot approve it until MDE has actually approved it. And on the floodplain waiver, it says that you're supposed to have all state, federal, and local regulations or approvals in place. So there's this sort of like, what comes first kind of a question. And I was wondering if you had taken the legwork and the time to actually ask MDE, since they have that may, it doesn't say shall, but if you've taken the legwork and talked to them about approving it, because our approval is being held up by them. And their sort of objection to this was prior encroachments or work that was done in the floodplain, which by us approving the DSP, we can't rectify that. Like, that's not within our authority. That would be DeFi that would do that. So have you talked to MDE about this? Because that's to me one of the quirks in whether or not this floodplain waiver is actually valid or not is contingent upon sort of timing and their approval for it.
Thank you again. For the record, Norman Rivera. To answer that last question directly, we constantly have talked to MDE to go ahead and issue it, seeing it saying permissive language of may. They have simply chosen not to because of the nature of this case, the sensitive nature. They want us to get full approvals, which in their mind is a DSP. So if the board approves this today, and then the district council does later on down the road, we should be able to get the MDE permit. The MDE permit is our full waterway construction permit. They have given us emergency authorization because, as you all know from prior testimony by us and our experts, the WCC facility and parking lot had zero stormwater management. Anything we do is better than that. So if we get the MDE permit, we've already stabilized the site, upper lot where the homes are built, and now the lower lot. So it has sediment erosion control. We have evidence in the record of the traps. Everything used to sheet flow right over the parking lot, right into the bog. Now it's being improved, but the waterway construction permit is critical. Mr. Smith and others keep expressing their concerns, but you're really holding up the process. The DSP allows other steps. And speaking of other steps, Mr. Dorn, it's probably helpful. I had to learn on the job, as they say. So the floodplain waiver has several conditions of approval. It in and of itself does not allow anybody to do any grading. The floodplain waiver was a requirement as part of the DSP to help establish the net acreage, the density, and to provide the stormwater management facility required for this development. So once the DSP is approved, we go to record plat, we go to grading permit, we file for a grading permit to do the compensatory storage pursuant to the floodplain waiver, and we have to satisfy those conditions. Those conditions, as you correctly stated, say we need all local, state, federal permits. That point is where we ask for those. Once the DSP is approved, the record plat is approved, because under the zoning ordinance, under the order of approvals, you can't get any permit without a DSP record plat. So we do the DSP record plat, we take our floodplain waiver with the conditions, we make all the appropriate applications to those agencies, they issue the permit, and DPI won't give me a grading permit till I show them evidence that I had the local, state, and federal permits. Everybody's conditioning everything to whatever somebody else does, which is a chicken and the egg thing. So we wish MDE would have let us do it because the water situation would be much better now. But we're waiting, and this DSP has been appealed. It's on remand. It's going to be 2 or 3 months now just to get to the district council. And then we have to go to record plat, then apply for permits. So you're talking really till the rest of the year, easy. I mean, next year, into the middle of next year, to provide the solution that everybody seeks. So we're eager to move forward. We've done everything we can. On the DSP back in February 2nd, we proffered 4 or 5 conditions, voluntarily subjecting us to more issues regarding inspections. That's not part of the remand, so I don't want to bring that up. But it's just the fact. We want to get the MDE permit because it's a condition of the floodplain waiver, and it allows us to continue our work. We're not shrugging off any obligations. It's just the way the different processes intertwine between the state, the feds, and the local. I hope that answers it.
Mr. Dorner, floor is yours.
That gets at like sort of the processes of this. So how do we, would it be MDE or would it be DPI that rectifies some of MDE's concerns, which earlier when you guys had the unauthorized work in the floodplain at the stream channel area, that was what they had cited as kind of their hesitation for giving the full approval. And that I guess they assume that when we approve the DSP, then it's rectified. But do they have to okay that, or is that DPI that does that? Because we don't have that authority. Like we're not an enforcement agency. So who kind of approves that everything is okay from that standpoint?
I'm sorry, I missed that, Mr. Dorner.
So in the MDE letter, they mentioned that Werline, your client, had early unauthorized work in the floodplain at the stream channel, and that was one of their hesitations for actually approving the non-tidal wetlands or non-tidal wetlands and waterways authorization. But we don't have an ability in the DSP process to actually address that because we're not an enforcement agency. So is that going to take DPI then going back and saying like we no longer consider this to be a violation or a problem? Like, because zoning can't fix enforcement issues.
So the answer, Mr. Dorner, is that since February, we have received inspection reports, clean inspection reports, meaning there's no violations every week since February to date. And that includes representatives of MDE. There was that initial illegal work in the floodplain that was stabilized. We put a head wall in. Everything is fixed. We're not touching anything. We're going to wait till the DSP is approved, and DPI can't force MDE to issue the waterway permit because their legal team down in Annapolis has defined in this particular matter that DSP must be approved, even though the code says may. So we're proceeding as we are told to do at this point. And DPI also has made all those inspections, and they have no violations. So MDE and DPI are clear. In fact, MDE keeps asking me, where's the DSP approval? So, you know, we update them regularly, and we're hoping that this gets resolved today and then further on down the road at the district council.
Okay, so then I think part of my question might be aimed at Ms. Giles later on. I don't know when we want to kind of get her input, but I'd like to know just clarification, like say the DSP gets approved today.
I think now's a good time. If you have a question for Ms. Giles, you know, jump right in.
Okay,
thank you.
So timing with Ms. Giles and what I was just asking about with the kind of earlier citation of the unauthorized work in the floodplain, would your office be the one that, if the DSP is approved, goes back to MDE to tell them that this is no longer an issue, or it's sort of an extant issue that they don't have to worry about, that the DSP has been approved and there's no existing violations on here? Or how does that happen in the approval process to make sure that that's not a remaining issue potentially? And then would your office continue to monitor it, or would it be MDE at that point?
So good morning. For the record, Mary Giles with the Department of Permitting, Inspection, and Enforcement. Yes, the DPI reissued our floodplain waiver in July of this year. Before we reissued our floodplain waiver, we coordinated with MDE specifically on this matter of compliance, response to the previous violations. MDE informed the agency, our agency, that they were not going to proceed to issue the waterway construction permit nor the discharge permit for the phase 2, which is the lower parking lot phase, until this zoning approval, i.e. this detailed site plan we're talking about today, is approved. MDE did indicate that the violation was not fully satisfied due to the lack of those permits. DPI issued our floodplain waiver with a contingency that DPI is not going to issue a grading permit for this site until the state permits have been issued and the violation associated with the MDE action is cleared and taken care of. So the order of events here is DPI reissued the floodplain waiver. The detailed site plan has to get approved. The applicant then has to come in and get council approval of the detailed site plan. Then the applicant has to secure state permits, the 2 permits we're talking about here today, and then DPI would be in a position of issuing a grading permit thereafter.
Okay, that's helpful in terms of the timing of it. What I also wanted to find out in terms of your floodplain waiver that you issued in July, not the 2018 one from before, I guess between the 2018 one and all the way up until July, there was the encroachment in the floodplain, and then there was a number of other sort of code violations that happened. In that area, there was streets that were blocked off that required police access to actually like keep the streets from flooding and from people going in that area. And in the findings or in the determinations that you have to make in the floodplain waiver, One of them is just not having any additional threat to public safety or any other adverse impacts on upstream or downstream. And my concern, I live in this area. I use the playground down there. I go through the wetlands and hike around there. I was just there on Tuesday, riding through and looking at deer and stuff in the area. I'm concerned about the downstream impacts on this and whether or not we're actually appropriately controlling for any sort of floodwater in that area, any kind of like damage or any sort of danger to life and property, which are all considerations in that waiver. What I didn't see in the correspondence to the district council, I saw that basically it said, yeah, we considered that section G and J in the county code, but it didn't say anything about flooding and the sort of the prior activity. It just sort of like looked ahead and said, we don't think it's going to be a problem in the future, which I agree if they do it correctly, like it shouldn't be a problem in the future. And technically it's not going to be in a floodplain. However, what concerns me is everything that's happened in the past has not given us a good indication of whether or not they could successfully do this. I think since February, I've seen the reports that the applicant has submitted. It looks like they've got it under control, and that was one of my sort of messages to them in February, is that you just need more time to look at this. But to what extent did your floodplain waiver consider that? And how do we deal with that at a local level? Because if this does go forward, I want to make sure that we have a mechanism for continuing to make sure that they remain in compliance, because this is a very sensitive project that we haven't done before to this scale in a floodplain. And I want to make sure it doesn't destroy the lower kind of very sensitive wetland areas down there or anything around there. And it doesn't become a cost that's back on the city of Hyattsville, who's had to shut down the streets and hasn't gotten reimbursed or anything for that. So I understand some of that is outside the hands of the applicant, because it was WSSC pipes and other things that burst, but then there are some things that have been at the fault of the applicant. To what extent does the floodplain waiver take that into account? And then what is DeFi going to do in the future to kind of make sure that we continue to be on the right side of everything?
Well, the floodplain waiver was issued with certain matters that considered some of those questions you have. For example, this project in the lower phase we're talking about is approved to install a stormwater management pond that controls not just water quality, but also quantity control. So there is a stormwater pond that will be built in that lower parcel if this project goes forward, that'll provide quantity control to reduce the runoff and ensure no downstream impact because of this project. This project also, as part of the floodplain approval, had to demonstrate that the access roads to the property were not flood prone, which that was considered in the waiver as well. The roadways that are adjacent to this property are above the floodplain and are not flood prone. This project actually in the floodplain, the amount of fill that's being placed into the floodplain based on this waiver is less than the amount of cut that is being excavated out of the floodplain. So the actual volume of dirt going in the floodplain will be less than it is today. That's a basic tenet in most county floodplain approvals, that the amount of cut and the amount of fill balance each other out. So that was verified as part of our floodplain approval process.
Okay, then in going forward, how are we going to make sure that this continues to be enforced? Because that's been one of the issues, from my understanding in this area, is that when there's been flooding, whether it's due to the applicant or other things, there's been this sort of like, who's in charge of it? Is it MDE or is it DPI? And it hasn't really been enforced. And my understanding is that the city of Hyattsville, who can speak later on their own accord, hasn't had really good cooperation from your department in actually making sure that this continues to be, to not having high levels of like runoff and stuff that could damage the streamland and wetland areas.
DPI enforces what it will be in these permits that are getting issued. It is important for folks to understand that in this county that there's floodplain and there are existing structures that were built a long time ago that are in the floodplain. This project, that's just an existing and latent condition. A new project It's not possible for a new project to be able to fix, kind of all the problems that exist in a downstream floodplain, but new projects are. This project is designed to eliminate any increases in stormwater discharges leaving the site. So.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand both points. That it was a parking lot before, like it had no ability to actually absorb the rainwater that was either falling directly on the property or coming across it. My concern is just in the process. I want to make sure that as we continue to go through this development, if it does get approved, that DPI is paying attention, because they were not. And your office failed miserably on some of these things. And that's as nicely put as I can say it, being a resident in this area and seeing some of this stuff. And I realized there wasn't any controls in place before. There should be controls in place in the future, and it should work really well if it works correctly. But I'm interested in the transition period. Like, is DPI going to actually be involved in monitoring this?
DPI has enforcement authority for zoning requirements, that whatever's on this site plan gets built according to the approved plans. DPI has enforcement authority for sediment leaving the site and so on. I was asked to participate in this hearing today for the floodplain waiver. I did not know that questions about enforcement were going to be coming up, so I do not have folks from inspections here today. But it's fair to say that DPI has issued many violations on this site and followed up, numerous times on violations. So.
Okay. That's fair enough. I don't mean to like beat you over the head or anything with the stick about the enforcement issues. I just wanted to convey that I was less than pleased in the process so far, and I want to make sure going forward, if it does get approved, because it's so sensitive, that we're working together and that the county offices are actually coordinating with the city and helping them, because some of the aspects in the floodplain waiver talk about remedies or things that the applicant would have to do. They would have to reimburse the city for police and stuff like that. That stuff hasn't happened so far. So when I read those kinds of things in the letter or the transmission to the district council, it really makes me wonder where the faltering on the communication is happening, because that hasn't happened so far. And it's been problematic to date. Over the last 9 months, the applicant has done a much better job, because I think Commissioner Washington made the motion in February, had said that I was going to have eyes on going in that area, and the applicant could expect that. And I have been. They've done a much more better job since that hearing in February at controlling the runoff and addressing the issues, but it hadn't been the case before. And that's why I'm hoping that you can take that back to your colleagues, because since that was the basis for parts of your waiver approval, I'm hoping that you can also talk with your enforcement staff and just make sure that we're being careful to keep the silt filters and the other things in place and working properly. So that would just be my request back to you. But I appreciate you coming here today and clarifying, particularly the darn process of like from MD, because I was utterly confused of like what we were supposed to do, and wanted to make sure that that was clear, and that we weren't going to be making a misstep again or something by sending this forward if we needed to do something else in the process. So I'll stop there, but thank you for taking the time to come. That was really helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner Dorner. Thank you, Ms. Giles. Commissioners, any other questions for Ms. Giles? Okay. Mr. Smith, you want to cross Ms. Giles?
I would. I just have a couple. Am I on mute, or can you hear me?
No, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I just have a couple of questions for Ms. Giles, and probably more appropriate to her than Mr. Rivera. In issuing the floodplain waiver letter and reviewing Werline's delineations and their floodplain study, did DPI take into account the more recent climate data in order to determine whether or not these delineations and studies were up to date and fully protective, as is required under subtitle 32 and the zoning ordinance and the Code of Maryland regulations and the Environment article and the Clean Water Act? did DPI make any attempt to incorporate the more recent climate data that and determine whether or not the floodplain, compensatory floodplain and the delineation and the stormwater management facilities would actually protect public health and life and property and the environment?
The floodplain waiver is based on the FEMA maps that were updated in 2016. FEMA updated all the floodplain maps in the entire county in the year 2016. That's what the floodplain delineation and the floodplain waiver is based on. The state of Maryland is active, and the state of Maryland and all the counties in Maryland are actively participating in a study right now to evaluate climate change. In all likelihood, that study will end up with increasing rainfall rates. Both state and county codes will in all likelihood be updated and rainfall rates will be going up, but that hasn't happened yet. So this project is based on the current criteria as it stands. Any floodplain delineation in this county, there's a base flood elevation that's established by the study. 1 vertical foot of freeboard is added to that elevation as a safety factor, and that's what's delineated. And then houses are supposed to be elevated to what's called the flood protection elevation, which is 2 vertical feet above the mapped elevation. In this instance, the houses on this project are 4.1 to 7.7 feet above the base flood elevation. So while climate change is certainly here and happening, these houses as designed will just don't see a scenario in which they would be impacted by climate change.
Thank you. If I could follow up, and Ms. Giles, it's nice to meet you sort of in person. We've traded emails in the past. Thank you for pointing out that Maryland is currently working to try to update its understanding of what climate change is doing to precipitation patterns and how they may affect decisions and impacts. It was actually in reviewing Worldline's application for a stormwater permit and waterway construction permit back in 2021. But I'll just point out they're belated applications because they had already undertaken substantial work on the site without even applying for this permit. It was actually in reviewing that permit. I'm going to ask my question, but
please ask the question.
I will. I'll frame it though. It was actually in researching that I came across one of the studies you're probably aware of, the Marissa study done by RAND on whether or not Atlas 14's intensity, duration, and frequency curves, which are generally, as far as I know, relied upon by agencies like DPI and designing engineers in designing projects and reviewing projects, that I came across that and got a clear understanding of what I thought I knew intuitively. And I think I understand from your answer that in reviewing the delineation and the floodplain study and the proposed facilities, that DPI did not take into account the kind of findings that were put forth by the Marissa Group, which was actually partly funded by the state of Maryland. Is that true? Yes or no? The DPI did not take into account those more recent findings?
The Marissa rainfall rates from that Marissa model have not been implemented in Prince George's County for any project yet. Like I said, it's in the study phase right now. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, DPI follows the lead from MDE. When MDE issues a model ordinance to change things about the floodplain or the stormwater code, then the counties follow. So it's in its study phase right now, but I don't know. And I certainly know that in this county and our neighboring counties, that has not been implemented to my knowledge. Definitely not in this county. We're waiting for the outcome of this storm committee with MDE to then implement changes to rainfall.
Okay, thank you. That helps. And relatedly, you relied on the effective map approved by FEMA in September 2016, and that consultation process with the county began probably around 2008. This is yes or no. What is your understanding of whether or not the effective maps, flood insurance maps, incorporate more recent, any climate data that's any more recent than 2000? Did they rely on Atlas 14?
I'm not certain which rainfall rates FEMA maps are based on.
Okay, thank you. And this follows up on Commissioner Dorner's questions. Clearly, Worline has a long history of operating without required permits, not installing required stormwater management and erosion control, discharging repeatedly.
Mr. Smith?
Did DPI take
Mr.
any
Smith?
of that?
Mr. Smith, stop talking. Ryan, Kenny, if he doesn't stop talking, when I ask him to mute him.
May I finish my question?
No, not when I'm talking. What I'm asking you to do is to not use this as an opportunity to make an argument. If you have a question, ask a question. Okay? You're in cross-examination of Ms. Giles. Feel free to ask Ms. Giles a question. You will have an opportunity to testify. If you could take him off mute, Kenny, and allow him to speak again. Yeah, hold on. I just want to make sure, because you're still on mute, Mr. Smith. Give a second. We'll work out the technology. Come off mute.
All right, thank you. All right, this is my simple question, which I was framing. In deciding to issue the floodplain waiver and any other permits that it has for this site, did DPI take into account Worline's record of violations and non-compliance on the site? That's a yes or no question, Mr. Shapiro, so hopefully that works.
Absolutely.
Yes, DPI did. We issued the revised floodplain waiver with a contingency in it that requires the applicant to secure the waterway state MDE waterway construction permit and another NOI permit, notice of intent to discharge permit, before the county will issue a grading permit. So yes, we did.
Thank you.
Other questions, Mr. Smith on cross?
I think I'm done, Mr. Shapiro. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Giles.
So we'll now move to speakers. We have, we'll start with City of Hodgeville. Ms. Simmons, we are back to you. If you could introduce yourself for the record and the floor is yours.
Before we jump over to City of Hodgeville, this is Commissioner Dorner. I just wanted to ask Mr. Rivera if you could just review the reports that you had used or that you had submitted into the testimony, because that's new material that I think is relevant to the floodplain waiver. And I just wanted you just to, if you're able to, or if you have an expert on that, could just talk about what's happened since then, because that was one of my concerns about the floodplain waiver initially.
Sorry about that. You're asking me to review the studies that went to DPI as to the floodplain waiver?
Yeah, because you submitted a number of reports, I think like GTA reports that you had about the runoff that was happening in that area. Some of them, I think, were February to July kind of period before DPI had gotten them. And we didn't really hear much about that. So I just wanted if you have a quick overview of them, if you can provide a little bit of background in terms of what they mean. I think in terms of the NCUs, that anything below 50 is probably fine, but I'm quickly getting outside of my climate background in terms of knowing like how to interpret those reports.
Let me just see what I can do. Okay, so I think what you're referring to Our GTA is a consultant. Back in February, we had voluntarily added conditions to do more self-enforcement and to work with DPI and MDE. One of your concerns that you mentioned is when you were walking the dog in the park over there, you saw that there was dirty water in that trap. But that trap is exactly supposed to be dirty. It's a sediment and erosion control facility that captures the water coming off the site, treats it. There's stone called riprap and other materials that protect the actual stream so that the water is filtered. So that water looks brownish, and that term of art is called turbidity. So GTA, our soil consultant, constantly monitors our turbidity levels. It's not really a specific regulatory issue, but we don't want DPI or anybody to think we're not doing our job, and that's how the sediment and erosion control traps are programmed and designed to keep cleaning the water as it enters the trap. So those are those studies that deal with that, which is different than studies that deal with the floodplain waiver, which is a different type of calculation, as Ms. Giles stated.
Okay, and what's the magical number that we should be? I obviously, like, the number is going to be a lot higher at the trap if it's being taken or read in like right above it. But then you also have a couple of measurements that are in like the stream water valley, like below that. What are appropriate kind of ranges for the NTUs that we should be seeing?
The industry standard is 150 leaving the trap. So it's way higher than that, obviously, because it's dirty, and then it goes down.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, now we're on to Ms. Simmons. I'm sorry, Ms. Simmons. City of Hyattsville.
Chair Shapiro and members of the board. For the record, Holly Simmons, Acting Director of Community and Economic Development with the City of Hyattsville. I'm here this morning to reaffirm the city's request for denial of the subject application and to speak to the city's concerns as they relate to the order of remand issued by the District Council on May 16th of this year. We'll also refer you to the city's correspondence to the Planning Board dated December 7th, 2022 and January 26th, 2023, which are included in the record. We reviewed the materials submitted by the applicant in response to the District Council's order of remand and believe that the applicant has not adequately demonstrated compliance with floodplain requirements outlined therein. In Section E3 of the District Council's order of remand, the District Council requires that any revised site plan submitted by the applicant shall contain a new decision from DPI on the applicant's new application request for a waiver to construct in the 100-year floodplain. DPI's new decision on the applicant's waiver request shall make all required findings and considerations in PGCC Section 32-206D and J as amended by CB 38/2016. The applicant has provided a new floodplain waiver from DPI dated July 25th, 2023. However, the new waiver does not address the findings and considerations of PGCC Section 32-206 Parts D and J. Part J outlines that the director shall consider and make at a minimum 12 findings of fact. Instead of including these findings of fact in the waiver issued on July 25th, DPI responds to them in a separate response document and states that the floodplain waiver is based on these code requirements. Part D requires a floodplain waiver shall be granted only upon 9 determinations, including but not limited to. There is good and sufficient cause that is based solely on the physical characteristics of the property and cannot be based on the character of the improvement, the personal characteristics of the owner and inhabitant, or local provision that regulates standards other than health and public safety. The granting of the waiver will not result in additional threats to public safety or other adverse impacts on other public or private property, either upstream, downstream, or adjacent to the subject property. The waiver is the minimum necessary, considering the flood hazard, to afford relief to the owner, and public funds shall not be expended to mitigate the results of the waiver. And the failure to grant the waiver would result in exceptional hardship due to the physical characteristics of the property. The July 25th floodplain waiver submitted by the applicant does not address the specific determinations in Part D. In relation to Part D, DPI's separate response to the order of remand indicates that This floodplain waiver has been reviewed and approved in accordance with these requirements. However, neither the waiver nor the response address the individual determinations as required by the District Council. A history of environmental violations on the site underscores the City of Hyattsville's respectful request to see the necessary determinations and findings of fact included in the floodplain waiver as required in the District Council's order of remand. Throughout its redevelopment of the former WSSC headquarters site, the applicant, developer Wehrlein Properties, has consistently failed to adequately address environmental issues. Incidents are described in detail in the city's letter to the Planning Board dated January 26th, and in the testimony provided by the city at the Planning Board's limited scope hearing on February 2nd and to the District Council on May 8th, 2023. As the Planning Board is aware, the City of Hyattsville is not an environmental regulatory agency, and so our community has had to rely on corrective and enforcement actions from both the Maryland Department of the Environment and Prince George's County Department of Permitting, Inspections, and Enforcement. Based on materials submitted with the applicant's response to the District Council remand, we understand recent inspection reports from DPI and MDE indicate no on-site violations. However, this does not negate the need to include required determinations and findings of fact in the new floodplain waiver. We agree and affirm that any revised site plan submitted by the applicant should address the requirements of the District Council order of remand related to the floodplain waiver. We believe it is reasonable and appropriate for the Planning Board to proceed with the following actions. 1, deny the detailed site plan application. And 2, in any future DSP application, require, as per the District Council, any revised site plan submitted by the applicant shall contain a new decision from DPI on the applicant's new application request for a waiver to construct in the 100-year floodplain. DPI's new decision on the applicant's waiver request shall make all required findings and considerations in PGCC section 32-206 D and J as amended by CB 38/2016. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Simmons, for the very thoughtful comments on behalf of the city. Much appreciated. We'll see if there are any questions from commissioners, and then we'll give folks an opportunity to cross as well. So Ms. Simmons, hold on. Commissioners, any questions for City of Hyattsville for Ms. Simmons? None? Okay. Mr. Smith, any cross of Ms. Simmons? Nope. Mr. Rivera, any cross of Ms. Simmons? And you'll have an opportunity at a rebuttal to address any issues when the time comes. Okay, thank you, Ms. Simmons. Appreciate it. Much appreciated. Now we will turn to Ms. Cole and then Mr. Smith. You'll have 15 minutes altogether for the two of you to manage your time as you will. We'll start with Ms. Cole. Mr. Smith, you have a question?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
I think Shauna Frickless may have joined the call. I've informed her that the Planning Board has gotten to the opposition statement. So I'm happy to go, as usual, I'm happy to go last if that works.
Ms. Frickles, are you on the line? Ms. Frickles?
She may be trying to get on. We were just trading texts. She's bouncing back and forth between work and this.
Let's start with Ms. Cole. Let's start with Mr. Smith. Take it offline. We'll start with Ms. Cole. Hopefully you can get Ms. Frickless on, and then we'll hear from her after Ms. Cole. So Ms. Cole, take it away. Introduce yourself. The floor is yours.
Thank you to the board and participants for listening to my testimony. My name is Allison Cole, and I oppose this project. Just as an initial matter, Mr. Rivera's interpretation of the Zimmer case is erroneous, as the court's decision only related to the District Council's authority and ability to call up issues after the Planning Board's decision on remand. That case does nothing to limit the Planning Board's authority as to DSP approval on remand and the scope of questions that we're able to talk about today. Excuse me. Statements made today, and even in the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission March report, discusses the fact that evidence of harm proffered in the record is largely irrelevant to the DSP approval decision today. But I disagree, particularly when it relates to such a core issue as density calculation. Setting aside that this is dismissive of harms suffered by the community, credibility of applications and reliability of required permits should matter at this approval stage, particularly as it relates to the reliability of important components of the plan, such as calculating the floodplain and promises in the revised waiver that no damage will take place around the site further downstream. I think Mr. Donner's questions go to this point also. Moving on to the current density calculation submitted, it does not take into account instructions from the district council, which stated applicant may not utilize acreage in the 100-year floodplain and the 2 parcels to be conveyed out of the tract to the city of Hyattsville to calculate density. Furthermore, the record lacks substantial evidence to demonstrate a density calculation excluding alleys, streets, and other public roadways. I understand that Werline disagrees that complying with these instructions is legally required. However, it is still unanswered. Calculations based on infill estimates and that do not include future plan conveyances or easements, if that's what it ends up being, are unavailing as to the fact that Werline has met the council's order on remand. As an aside, Mr. Rivera's statement seems to indicate that the actual number of townhouses could change at the platting stage, but I somehow sincerely doubt anything will have changed 4 years from now as it relates to how Werline's planted the flag on density. Moreover, the density calculation undermines the purpose of RSF 65 zoning, which I do think is still at issue despite statements that the issues are limited on remand. There's been no legal or regulatory evidence as to why we should not talk about this issue. This zoning rule should guide this planning board at all stages of the process, even with revised proposals. Even projects that fall into other uses, such as townhouses, should be approved with these purposes in mind. One of those purposes is to encourage preservation of trees and open space, and another is to encourage development that uses the natural terrain. The fill and build approach of this project and density ensures profitability over safeguards, like maximizing permeable surfaces, and this contradicts the zoning rule. The point I'm trying to make here is that this body has an independent obligation to ensure the purpose of zoning rules are followed and need not accept the district council now years old density maximum for this project, which is really an estimate. In the midst of national movement to change FEMA's sanction of the fill and build process, I asked the board to do more to protect the community instead of grant variances that lack adequate rationale, such as those concerning minimum lot sizes and lots and limits to impervious surfaces. These only exacerbate the issue. With that, I hope that the board takes these comments into consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Appreciate that. If you could stop the clock, Mr. Crum, Flanagan, add 8 minutes onto that, because I said that they'd have up to 15 minutes. They may not use it, but that's what I said. So put up to 11 minutes at this point. Commissioners, any questions for Ms. Cole?
Mr. Chairman, not specifically, but both Ms. Simmons and Ms. Cole referenced how certain things that were a part of the district council's remand had not been considered by our staff in terms of their recommendation. So at some point, I would like council and or staff, and certainly I guess Mr. Rivera, to address that in their rebuttal and comments. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate that. That I agree. Mr. Smith, do you have any cross for Ms. Cole? No. Mr. Rivera, any cross for Ms. Cole? You'll have rebuttal again when you get to it.
Just one quick question, Mr. Chair. Norman Rivera for the record. So Ms. Cole, I think I heard you earlier say you're on the board of Sustainable Hyattsville, as I believe Greg has stated before. When you write the letters and speak today, are you speaking on behalf of yourself, or are you authorized by the board of directors through a valid vote to make these representations to the board? Because I've seen that you represent, a large volunteer organization, but I'm not sure that it was subject to a meeting, quorum, proper vote. So if it wasn't, I don't think you could represent the board member without authorization by the board. Otherwise, it's your personal testimony. So the question was, is it authorized by the sustainable board or corporation?
I don't know what you mean about quorum, but I'm listed as a board member in corporate filings, and it's a registered nonprofit, but the testimony is my own, did not go through some, whatever approval process you're referring to.
Okay, thank you.
And for what it's worth, Ms. Cole, I heard you earlier say that you were speaking on your own behalf. So I hear you reiterating what you had said before. Mr. Rivera, if that's helpful, I heard you say that twice.
Great, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Turn to Mr. Smith. You've got 11 minutes on the clock. The floor is yours. You're on mute, Mr. Smith. We can't hear you.
I'm sorry, how much time do I have?
11 minutes. 11?
Okay, I'll try to make this short and sweet. That's unusual for me, but for the record, Greg Smith, I reside at 4204 Farragut Street in Hyattsville. I serve on the board of Sustainable Hyattsville. I'm the president, and I'm authorized to speak on behalf of the organization. A couple quick points. First of all, I'll incorporate by reference the statement by the city. I thought it's quite excellent, and Ms. Cole, quite excellent. In both of its decisions approving the conceptual site plan, the board, the district council set a hard condition that at the DSP stage, Worldline must show that it has demonstrate that it has all of the required floodplain authorizations from the agencies of jurisdiction. In this case, the agency of jurisdiction is MDE with delegated authority from the EPA. MDE has not issued that authorization. The condition of getting that kind of authorization was also set forth in the floodplain waiver letters issued by DPI. It's in the subtitle 32 that applicant must have all the required authorizations from state and federal agencies. It's an environment article. They don't have that authorization, so this application actually should never have been accepted as complete for formal review by the planning director. It shouldn't be heard and it shouldn't be approved by the planning board, yet here we are. Getting to density, a long history. Ms. Cole placed in the record before the district council earlier this year documents that we received from the planning board, or rather from the planning department in September of 2022, containing threads of emails between Mr. Rivera and senior planning staff about how to address the density issue. Mr. Rivera lobbied to rely on gross acre, and that's exactly what the staff then agreed to do. And more than that, they not only agreed to do that, they advised Mr. Rivera that the way to approach it was to make that request of staff. They would incorporate it in the technical staff report, and then he needed to convince the council to go along with that approach that clearly conflicts with the zoning ordinance, which by definition defines density as dwelling units per net lot area, and defines net lot area as gross area minus the 100-year floodplain minus streets, alleys, and other public ways. That's the law. Whether they want to introduce gross tract area, which was also introduced during those threads of emails between Mr. Rivera and senior planning staff, and Ms. Kozak was copied on many of those emails. Mr. Hunt was as well. What we have is a history going all the way back to 2018, where the developer's attorney and senior planning staff were basically coordinating on coming up with an approach that evades those requirements in the zoning ordinance. And here we are. That issue is before the courts again right now in two cases. Our challenge of the district council's reapproval of the CSP, and our challenge of the planning board's approval of the preliminary plan of subdivision for the upper parcel. So that's an important point. Properly calculated. And as Ms. Simmons testified, and I think Ms. Cole did too, the floodplain waiver letter cannot, and presumably the delineation cannot rely on improvements. It relies on the current state. And the current state with a FEMA map, that if they want to adopt that, and their own delineation, showing the current state is 3.02 acres, or roughly that, in the floodplain. So the calculation of density should rely on that. And if you follow that, and you follow the provisions in the zoning ordinance, the density of the townhouses on the lower parcel would be 33 townhouses per acre. If you go ahead and you use their delineation of 1.29 acres, 60% lower than the figure given by Werline in most of its previous plans and stated by staff in some of their technical staff reports. If you go ahead and buy that, though, you still have to subtract the street, the alleyway, by law. And simply by doing that, the density goes up to 13.8 townhouses per acre. Subtract the sidewalks, it goes up a bit further. And that both of those figures would exceed the 12.3 that the council approved arbitrarily, I think, in October of 2022. Now, getting to this question of whether or not the environmental issues matter or climate change matters, or whether relying on current and accurate and forecasted precipitation data matters, they do. They do. They absolutely do, because while you're not an environmental permitting agency or enforcement agency, you are a permitting agency. You issue approvals that then lead to other approvals, and approvals that can have profound, long-lasting impacts on communities and the environment, public health, and property. So you have an affirmative obligation to ensure that your decisions protect those things and to ensure that they conform with and support the zoning ordinance's goals and policies and the general plans and the sector plan. And if you don't take into account Werline's track record of violations, if you don't take into account the fact that climate change is happening and the county recognizes it and state recognizes it, feds recognize it, and if you don't look at the fact that these plans and these approvals don't take into account climate realities, then you are casting aside your affirmative responsibility, and your decision is essentially arbitrary and capricious. And the Fourth Circuit Court actually ruled that an approval by the state of West Virginia related to a pipeline, that approval that ignored the applicant's long history of environmental violations, as is the case here, was by definition an arbitrary and capricious approval by the state. And the Fourth Circuit Court in the United States reversed the state, or vacated the state's approval. So if you don't take into account these climate realities and the fact that DPI's consideration of the floodplain delineation and the compensatory mitigation, if you don't take into account that they don't take climate change into account, you really cannot make an informed decision about density, because you may be working with an inaccurate, incorrect floodplain delineation, and you can't make an informed decision about whether or not this project will meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance and the subtitle 32, or whether or not it will harm public health and the environment, nearby properties, and the like. In her answers to my question, Ms. Giles really referred only to the safety of the folks who might buy one of these 41 townhouses at $800,000 plus. That really isn't that is just one issue, and it's a smaller issue. You should be concerned about potential impacts on the surrounding properties, Magruder Woods Park, Driscoll Park, homes that are adjacent to or very nearby. Our local streets, which Werline has repeatedly flooded with sediment-contaminated stormwater, and yet made multiple statements to the public and to Maryland's agencies saying that there have not been discharges from their upper parcel, and that they have played no role in the flooding on Gallatin Street. They have made these statements. So ignoring that fact is problematic. We have placed abundant information in the record about how these analyses and approvals are probably defective and non-protective. we've placed abundant evidence in this record and previous records that the density calculations conflict with what the law dictates. Werline, to evade this now, wants to rely on net tract area rather than net lot area. But the law is absolutely clear on that point. The density is defined as dwelling units for net lot area. It does not refer to net tract area, and it defines net lot area quite clearly. Gross acres minus the 100-year floodplain, minus streets, alleys, and other public ways. And it would be hard to come up with any kind of definition under which a sidewalk, either on the periphery of the property or through the property, is not a public way. If it's not, what is it? Is there any gate on it? So we've come here, we're here now, and we're like to argue, well, golly, it's been 5 years and it's also terrible. Well, nearly all of the delay in these processes have been caused by errors committed by Werline. They've ignored the law. They've tried to get around the law. They've lobbied senior planning staff to ignore the law, and then senior planning staff did. And then we had to go up to the Appellate Court of Maryland or the Court of Special Appeals, and they reversed the district council on that density point. The density point that is the subject of the threads of emails between Mr. Rivera lobbying senior planning staff to ignore the law, them agreeing, not only agreeing to it, but then instructing Mr. Rivera on how to do it. And then Mr. Rivera actually sending planning staff a draft letter for them to review that he can then submit to try to lobby them more directly to rely on gross acres instead of net acres. And it goes on and on and on. Right now, at this point, Werline does not have a valid stormwater permit. Their previous coverage expired on September 30th by law. Werline did submit a notice of intent to seek coverage, but it was inadequate.
Mr. Smith, you're out of time. Let me give you a minute to wrap up, okay?
Sure. They don't have the required authorizations. This case should not even be before you. Their applications in every case to the state have contained either inaccurate statements or failed to provide required information. And in fact, MDE has instructed Werline, they did at the beginning of October, that their application for new coverage under Maryland's general stormwater permit for construction-related stormwater, the very thing that Mr. Dorner is so concerned about and should be, their application is inadequate, incomplete, and I pointed out to the MDE reviewer that it also makes inaccurate statements. So I'll just wrap it up there. There's so many points we could cover, but please don't ignore climate change and don't ignore their atrocious environmental track record at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Commissioners, what I suggest, first of all, there may be questions for Mr. Smith. We'll allow that. If there's any cross with Mr. Smith, we'll go for that. Then what I'm going to do is, as we will have the opportunity to ask staff some questions, because I believe that I heard Commissioner Washington said that, then maybe other commissioners some questions for staff as well. Based upon, and then once that is done, then we'll close the public hearing and we'll go into deliberation. So boom, boom, boom. So the first thing is there any cross of Mr. Smith? Mr. Rivera, any cross? Again, you'll have an opportunity in rebuttal to say what you need to say, but you any cross of Mr. Smith?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. There's no cross. So now, commissioners, you may have questions for staff. So I'll start with Commissioner Washington and see if there are any other questions as well. Commissioner Washington, take it away.
No additional. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No questions other than the one I posited. Again, Ms. Simmons, I'm sorry, Ms. Simmons and Ms. Cole commented about certain things that had not been taken into consideration with regards to the district council's remand, and I would just like to hear from staff on that.
So,
yes.
Mr. or Ms. Kozak. Okay, Ms. Kozak.
Yes, just for clarification, I believe Ms. Simmons was referring to DPI's new floodplain waiver did not make the required findings and considerations in section 32-206D and J as required by the remand order. I think that was the one point from her. If so, I would note that the DPI's letter to the district council did indicate that they approved the floodplain waiver based on those code requirements. It did not individually respond to every bullet point within those sections, but I would just see if Ms. Giles has any further input on that.
Ms. Giles, we can't hear you.
This is Mary Giles with DPI. The floodplain waiver, the applicant cited all the necessary sections in the code and responded to a DPI review that DPI also prepared not only a revised floodplain waiver letter, but also a response to the district council citing all the aspects of the remand. We basically point by point responded to every item that the county council brought up in their remand.
Thank you both. I appreciate it. Nothing further from me, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other commissioners' questions?
Yeah, I have a question for maybe Ms. Kozak, since you just mentioned the two sections in the code, but it actually might go to the David or Laura, depending on whoever has the code open. So just for clarification, because I opened up the can of worms on some of these things. One of the things that I was talking about was the MDE letter. And I think the code, if you look at section 32-206, I don't think J covers it at all. But I think in D that it talks about federal, state, local laws or regulations. And I believe, just so we're abundantly clear, Mr. Smith had said that the applicant would have to have all authorizations. And I think that's actually misstating the code. If I recall, I think it says that the development would not violate other federal, state, or local laws or regulations. And I realize we're splitting hairs on here, but for me, I was caught up in some of the MDE kind of conflicts back and forth. But there is a difference between violating, which I don't think is necessarily the case that I've heard today, versus having all authorizations, which I believe is a new interpretation of the code that really is not consistent with what's actually in there. So I just wanted to clarify, so that way I don't make the wrong decision when it comes to voting time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ms. Tellerico, Mr. Warner.
David Warner, Principal Counsel. Unless Laura's looked at that particular issue, I'm really looking at section 32-206 for the first time. I think Ms. Giles is probably better prepared to answer that question than I would be, unless Laura knows about it.
I would concur with Mr. Warner on Mr. Giles being the best equipped to address the individual sections of 32-206 D and J, given that DPI administers that part of the code. However, can take a quick look.
Ms. Giles, are you prepared to answer?
With regard to the section in the floodplain code that pertains to federal, state, and local permits, the floodplain code states that the development, in order to grant a waiver, that, quote, the development will not violate other federal, state, or local laws or regulations. DPI issued the revised floodplain waiver with a contingency that the federal or the state permits that this project is lacking will be issued before we issue a county grading permit. And therefore, in putting that order of approvals in our floodplain waiver, we felt that that was compliant with that clause.
Commissioner Dorner, that's address it.
Yeah, I think that addresses just that they don't have to have all the authorizations yet in place, as long as they don't violate them later.
Okay.
The code says the development will not violate other federal, state, or local laws or regulations. So.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Giles. Okay, Commissioners. So, any other questions for staff? If not, this public hearing is closed. We're under deliberation. Any deliberation? And,
excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, Chair. Could we not close the hearing first? I did have something I needed to add to the record.
yeah, let's. I take back what I said. We have not closed the public hearing. And Mr. Warner, you have something you want to include?
I did, and it's going to take a minute. I apologize.
Wait, Mr. Warner, before you do that, I see Shanna Frickless has joined us.
Okay.
So the public hearing is still open. I would prefer that she goes. I'm glad you were able to join us. You were not sworn in. I don't think you were sworn in, were you, Ms. Frickless?
No, I wasn't, and my apologies. I work for.
So I'm going to swear you in. Hold on one sec. All right. Please raise your right hand. You solemnly, there we go. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that your testimony will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do, so help me God.
Thank you. So consider yourself sworn in. I'm going to give you up to 3 minutes to speak, okay? And introduce yourself for the record, and the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. My name is Shanna Frickless. I reside at 5008 40th Place in Hyattsville, which is 4 doors down from the disputed lower parcel that we've been discussing. I am in opposition to this project for the sake of my home and my community, and I believe that the PG County Planning Board should similarly be motivated to deny DSP 21001. So I will be echoing some of what Greg has been saying, that the planning board should absolutely be using the most recent data available, taking into account the potential impact of climate change, and believe that I work for a permitting agency, and there is we absolutely take those sorts of things into account. Climate change, FEMA is consistently adjusting their floodplain maps for a reason, and they absolutely need to be taken into account. Climate science and zoning estimations are things that a planning board, just like FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, where I work, takes into account in doing their zoning and planning with respect to energy projects. And similarly, the area where they're planning to put these row houses, which there are 41 of them, which is not reflective of the neighborhood makeup in our suburban area, which are all detached houses. I have a small plot that has 1/8 of an acre, and these are going to be much more dense and putting much more of a impact on not only the floodplain, but our busy road. The 40th Place turns into Gallatin. We have stop signs that have flashing lights because there is so much traffic. There is an accident that has been on my street, literally right in front of my house, and this level of density, might be acceptable in an area where there isn't such of a concern, but it's an extremely delicate area. We are right up against Trumbull Trail and the park, Driscoll Park. And I have seen myself documented the sediment runoff that has occurred into Trumbull Trail, which then goes into a tributary that takes it out into the Anacostia River. So I don't trust that Worldline, based off of their construction that has been on the upper parcel, will be paying more attention to environmental regulation, or the fact that they have again fudged the rules with respect to density, that they have not had the proper permits, that they failed to provide required information, or straight up lied in documents. I am also an attorney, and I've reviewed a number of these documents. I'm clearly not here in that regard as representation, but as a concerned resident of my neighborhood. But I certainly feel like I represent the concerns and opinions of a lot of my neighbors, and I am one of the closest individuals right next door. Like I said, 4 doors down. And so my flood insurance has gone up since I moved in 2 years ago because of those floodplain delineations changing, and the fact that the Worldline thinks that the row homes that they're providing to our community are not going to impact that floodplain more. I actually grew up in California, and they were doing a building project down my street over there. And because of that, my house flooded 2 feet, and they'd never seen that kind of flooding before. And I'm extremely concerned that that same sort of issue could be something that I face in my new home. And I just got married last month. I want to be starting a family here in Hyattsville, in this community, taking my kids to Driscoll Park, and not worrying about flooding and not worrying about the incredibly dangerous impact that it could be having on our streets with the additional, thoroughfare traffic. So that about sums up my statements. And I also submitted something for the record, and I have appeared before you before, and I really appreciate your time and consideration in this matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm glad you're able to take the time out and have your voice heard. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any questions for Ms. Frickless? None? Okay. I neglected one thing. Thank you, Ms. Frickless. I neglected one thing in terms of our process. There's just a lot of moving parts there with me. Before we close the hearing, I want to give Mr. Rivera the opportunity for rebuttal and close. But first, let's hear from Mr. Warner. Then we'll turn to Mr. Rivera. Then we will close and take up and we will deliberate. So Mr. Warner first, then Mr. Rivera.
Okay, thank you. David Warner, Principal Counsel. So since this application was initiated back in 2018, it's 5 years later, and we are still having debates about density and how it's calculated. And this is fresh in my mind because we argued it yesterday in court in another part of this project. And so I felt like based on the discussion between Mr. Smith and Mr. Rivera as to the calculation, now Ms. Washington's asked the question, what is the legal support for staff's determination of density in this background report that is before us? Okay, so 2018, Werline, as they were permitted to do in an overlay zone, were allowed to bring forward a request to add to the table of uses and to change any of the bulk regulations associated with those uses, which is permitted in the overlay zone. They came forward with a request for townhouses, and they came forward with a request for a certain number of dwelling units per acre. And the planning board looked at that, said it was fine. It went up to the district council. District council said, that looks good to us. And that was appealed. I don't know all the parties to the appeal. Mr. Smith sounded like he said he was one of the parties because he said they. It says Sarah Eisen and several neighborhood residents appeal, which is fine. But it's important to note that it was the residents that appealed, because if you go to the decision of the appellate court in this case, which determined that the density calculation of the district council and the planning board was incorrect, they said, no, it's not gross density. It's actually should be the number of dwelling units per net acre of net lot or tract area. It directed the district council to calculate it as the number of dwelling units, I'm going to say it again, per net acre of net lot or tract area. It's the very last sentence in the case. Now it's confusing because if you go to the zoning code, the definition of density is, as Mr. Smith put it, the number of dwelling units per acre of net lot area, period. However, the appellants, according to this appellate court opinion, the appellants, the Eisen parties, said you should look to section 27-442H of the zoning code to determine density. And the appellate court agreed with their proposal and said the table expresses density as the maximum dwelling units per net acre of net lot or tract area. It's actually a slash. The court interpreted that as or. Why does this matter? Well, the zoning ordinance has two different definitions. There's a definition of net lot area, and there's a definition of net tract area. And they're two different definitions. And what the court said is you need to determine density based on the number of dwelling units per net acre of net lot or net tract area. It's like they gave you a choice. So net lot area is defined as the total contiguous area excluding alleys, streets, and other public ways and landline in the floodplain. The definition of net tract area is gross tract area minus land in the floodplain and land that has been dedicated, donated, or otherwise conveyed out of the tract. There's two definitions. The applicant, and this is in the applicant's submission, that's where I saw it written, has said, I'm going to use net tract area. And I'm going to read that definition exactly as it's read, because the appellate court said I could use tract area. And I'm going to subtract out the floodplain, and I'm going to subtract out land that has been dedicated, donated, or otherwise conveyed out of the tract, of which there has been none. And I'm going to use that definition. And at the time we had this case in February, he or his team had provided staff with a calculation that said the floodplain was would be 1.29 acres at the end of the waiver period, or once the waiver is issued. Now we have evidence since submitted by DPI in their new waiver letter that that figure is correct, 1.29 acres. So staff took the applicant's request to use net tract area, calculated the gross tract area as, is it 4.66 acres? Is that right? Subtracted out the floodplain that both DPI and the applicant said is the size, 1.29 acres, and didn't subtract out any of the land that's been dedicated, donated, or otherwise conveyed, because there hasn't been any. And so that's how we get to the calculation in the background. And it comes straight from the appellate court, which was using the formula that was recommended by the appellants themselves. So I think that hopefully at least lays out the legal background for how they got to this calculation. And I felt like it's important, not only in response to the question from Commissioner Washington, but there continues to be debate about this. And I think if we get this into the record, at least when this returns to the district council, they'll understand the legal analysis behind our background.
That's very helpful.
Thank you.
Mr. Warner, thank you for that. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Warner in this issue?
No, but a huge thank you. That certainly clears it up. And I think that detail is certainly appropriate for the record. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so with that, we'll turn to the applicant for rebuttal and close. Mr. Rivera.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Thank you for your patience, everyone. I'll be brief. Thank you, Mr. Warner, definitely for that. Obviously, it was fresh in your mind being in court yesterday and planning board today. So that was a wonderful dissipation. That was what the district council was concerned about at the remand here on May 8th. They didn't understand how you get from here to there. The gross, the floodplain, there's no dedication. So I'm glad you went through that. It would be important for me to point out to them in the transcript following. I had also earlier in my presentation cited Exhibit 8, which talks about how Dewberry justified the floodplain, which equals the 1.29 floodplain acreage, which is deleted from the 4.66 to get to the density calculation. So now the logic and the math works. So a wonderful way to express that, and you really put it in cogent terms for everybody. One point of clarification on that Zimmer case, I think Ms. Cole disagreed about the planning board's limited consideration ability. Looking at page 92, the Zimmer case went to the Court of Special Appeals, the Circuit Court Specials, and then the Court of Appeals. It's in the Court of Appeals Special Appeals decision, page 92 of the Court of Appeals decision, where the court cited in the Court of Appeals that the planning board's consideration was limited to by the district council to the issues remanded to the board. That's what I meant by the planning board jurisdiction be limited. If it was a regular site plan, everything would go in related to the criteria for approval of the site plan. But the record already is replete with the staff report, the resolution, and all the other evidence in the record. So the Court of Appeals said, we agree with this construction. So I just want to make that clear because the Zimmer case is a little convoluted, but that's what it said with respect to jurisdiction. I'm glad Mrs. Washington, you asked the question about the floodplain and criteria. As Mary pointed out, the July 25th letter to the district council went point by point by point as to the findings and all the criteria which they elucidated to the council that they met, as well as in the floodplain waiver letter. Again, in summary, the floodplain waiver is conditional. That allows us to go forward, just like the DSP allows us to get the NDE waterway construction permit, so we can hopefully bring all these things to closure as we proceed forward. I thank you for your time. I urge the board to forward this record to the positive recommendations of the district council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. That is your rebuttal and close. So with that, we will close the public hearing. And now, commissioners, we're on for deliberation. Commissioners, thoughts, reactions, comments?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Smith, yes?
Yeah, I'm looking at unless they've changed since I downloaded them, I'm looking at the planning board's rules of procedure. And the rules state that the order of a hearing is rebuttal by the applicant and then summation by each side and staff. And what we've had here is staff giving a summation and then Mr. Rivera being allowed to rebut or sum up his case, but not us. So it seems like according to your rules of procedure, we should have a chance briefly sum up our case.
Hold on one second, Mr. Smith. Mr. Warner, did I misstate our own processes? Does Mr.
No, this is David Warner, Principal Counsel. Mr. Smith is looking at the current zoning ordinance. This case, of course, is being conducted under the prior zoning ordinance, and our current procedural rules follow the process that you followed here. So everything is in accordance with both the law and our rules.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Smith. So we are following the process that we typically follow. So we are closed again. Commissioners, any deliberation? If not, I would look for a motion.
No deliberation from me, but I did want to thank everybody for the added testimony today. And I wanted to specifically, or especially thank you, Ms. Giles, for not only making yourself available, but because you certainly helped, I think, not only me, but us fill in a lot of procedural gaps in terms of how things are handled and managed. So I just wanted to say on record, thank you. Thank you for your presence today.
And Mr. Chairman,
I apologize. I'm sorry to interrupt. But my excellent team here pointed out to me and said, David, actually the procedures do have a summation requirement. We have not followed that in our regular accordance with our cases. We have rebuttal, and that's where we finish things. So I apologize to Mr. Smith, but he did point that out in our rules, which is now a legal requirement in the new law. So I thought he was referring to that, but I'm impressed. So he is entitled an opportunity to provide summation, and I would grant him that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And Mr. Smith, You have another bite at the apple here. You have your close, and then we always give the applicant the final word. So after you speak, Mr. Warner, Mr. Rivera, if you have anything else you want to add, you can. But Mr. Smith, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll do my best to make it mercifully brief. The district council's decision was clear. The condition is that Worline must demonstrate that it possesses all of the required floodplain authorizations from the agency of jurisdiction. They do not. They clearly do not. The order does not say that Worline has applied for or is negotiating with MDE to issue, or that DPI might negotiate with MDE to ignore the council's order. It's just very clear. It's a clear mandate from the council. It's in the CSP. That case is now before the courts. You would have to have the council revise its CSP order in order to be able to move forward and approve this DSP. On the density issue, the courts were not clear on net lot versus net tract. Our ordinance is clear on how density is defined and how it's calculated. So that should be, I think, the ruling law. We have placed abundant evidence in the record regarding Worline's deplorable track record. They are discharging less now than they were because they built out the upper parcel, and we're allowed to do it despite having so many violations and despite not having applied in a timely way for the required permits. And it's appalling. The DPI allowed Worline to proceed with work in 2019 and 2021, despite Worline never having applied for the required permits. It was only once we got MDE on the scene that there was any real enforcement. That's appalling. And if you want to rely on DPI's work, please take that into account. Again, the Fourth Circuit Court was clear, ignoring the environmental violations of an applicant, and then determining that somehow they're going to behave going forward as a rationale for issuing a permit. In this case, you're issuing an approval, is arbitrary and capricious. Ignoring the evidence we've placed on the record regarding climate change and how the evidence that comes from the state and federal agencies and county agencies about what climate change has been bringing and will bring. And then the findings of studies like the one that the state of Maryland helped fund by Rand Corporation through the Mercer program, that the intensity duration frequency curves that are typically relied on by agencies and engineers in designing stormwater facilities and floodplain facilities are, at this point, a quarter century out of date, and not only are certain to underestimate impacts and lead to under-designs, but have been probably leading to under-designed facilities. Ignoring that, again, is arbitrary and capricious. And we appreciate that the issues are somewhat complex, but I'll go back to Mr. Rivera's testimony on July 26, 2018, where he practically opened his testimony by thanking planning staff for, quote, rescuing the project. It's time to stop rescuing this project. The council's order was clear. The density law is clear, and you have ample grounds for denying this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Appreciate that. Mr. Rivera, back to you for any final close.
Thank you.
I apologize, Mr. Chair and Mr. Rivera. Would it be all right if I provide some brief summary comments as well?
Let me think about that from a process perspective, because you are not a party in opposition, Ms. Simmons. So I'm always looking to be deferential to the city in this. Mr. Warner, given their position, do you have an opinion about that?
No, I think I'm just going to quote just so we have it. The summation is by each side and staff. She could be considered, a side, I suppose. So that's
certainly give you the latitude, Ms. Simmons. So go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate it, Mr. Chair. Just to be very brief, I did hear testimony to the effect that the specific points in parts D and J have been included in the materials for this case. And specifically to part D, I haven't seen those responded to directly. So that is something that I perhaps am wrong in, but I would be interested to see where those are particularly. And additionally, I do believe that it is important to include the direct responses to those points in the waiver itself as required by the district council in their order of remand, particularly the points where there's good and sufficient cause that is based solely on the physical characteristics of the property, and that the waiver is the minimum necessary, and that failure to grant the waiver would result in exceptional hardship due to the physical characteristics of the property. These are not insignificant standards to meet. So seeing those for the purposes of record keeping, consistency, clarity in that single waiver document, I do think is important. So thank you very much for your consideration and your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Simmons. I appreciate it. Okay, Mr. Rivera.
All right, let's see, this is a record time for this case, 129. Again, for the record, Norman Rivera, representing the applicant, a very quick re-summary, if you will. Just to address a couple of points by Mr. Smith, he says we have to have all our permits. But that's not quite what the order says. He purports to state that the county council said that, but it does not say that. Point 4 of the remand order, I'll read it verbatim on page 8 of the decision. Any revised site plan submitted by the applicant shall include evidence of all federal and state permits required to commence with any development of the proposed project. So the required to commence with any development. So any development, you all know, starts in phases, grading, paving, et cetera. So whatever federal and state permits is associated with that phase or that type of development, we will get. We're not ignoring that requirement. That is standard procedure. And it also is repeated in one of the 14 conditions of approval of the DPI floodplain waiver. To address this, I think it was Ms. Simmons' statements about the record, I agree with you. And the letters of July 25th by DPI to Noga outline all the criteria for approval point by point, as well as the floodplain waiver letter from DPI dated July 25th. So the record is covered, and I'm glad we went through that exercise because that is one of the things that will come up later at district council. The net tract area that Mr. Warner spoke about was the correct dissertation on how that has occurred. We have followed, contrary to what Mr. Smith has said, the Court of Special Appeals opined on that. Then the circuit court remanded it to the district council. The district council remanded it back to the board, and it has been reapproved with that correct court-corrected calculation as elucidated by Mr. Warner. So I think we're all good there. With that, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I conclude.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rivera. So now we are officially closed. Mr. Warner, before I say that for the 7th time, any of the process issues?
I hope not.
Okay.
But none that I see.
All right, thank you. So we are closed. Commissioners' deliberation.
No, just thank everybody again and appreciate the learnings as part of the procedural process. So,
thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Mr. Chairman, I was going to add that and thank all of the participants today, especially Mrs. Giles and everyone who came to participate in this process. For many of us, at times, it becomes a relearning experience and a new learning. I mean, over and over again, it seems the same lessons, but the citizens help us to think it through and come to a decision that benefits the community. And thank you all for participating.
Yeah, I'll also chime in, say identical to what my colleagues have said, but particularly I should probably say thanks to Ms. Giles because I gave her such a hard time here. But I
Yeah, no hazing, Will.
Let him suck up.
that I wanted to know about, because I agree with some of what's been said today by like the city of Hyattsville, Ms. Simmons mentioning that the responses themselves were not in the waiver letter. That would have been a lot more helpful if they had been in there, because I looked for the same thing. I would disagree with Mr. Rivera that all of the points were adequately addressed. They were addressed. On that note, he's correct. They were addressed in the letter to the district council, but they were subpar in any of their kind of determinations of those of the determinations and of the findings. Like on some of the issues on the state and local stuff and on the floodplain and danger to life and property, it's just like a little paragraph saying we considered this, but not saying how or what or why it was okay now in July when that was penned, as opposed to 2018, conditional upon all of the issues that have happened between then and have been raised in the community. Having that additional context would have been so much more helpful in reviewing that letter to the district council. And that's why I pressed today. And that's why, even though I don't think those elements were there in that letter to the district council, and they certainly weren't in the waiver letter for the floodplain, I think they were mentioned today, and they were discussed by Ms. Giles. Whether or not we think it's adequate enough or not, I think it's probably outside the scope of some of the decisions that we have to make. I would have preferred perhaps more and more care being taken, but that's not necessarily the point at which we get to make, or which I'm going to make the decision on in a few minutes. And I do want to mention, since everyone has sort of brought up like what they do for their day jobs, one of my day jobs, or my side job, is that I run a research team for the federal government for an agency. And literally in October, when we had this case come before us on Thursday, 2 days prior, we had organized a whole event on climate change. And I'm fairly quantitative, as most of you've kind of figured out probably watching cases. And we brought in experts for FEMA and from other places who are trying to measure the impacts on climate change. And it's tough. FEMA is understaffed and very far behind in terms of updating the flood maps. It's a massive project for them to do on any sort of routine basis. Years ago, before we even were talking about climate change, I'd gone out and actually contracted up and licensed some of the data. I got the FEMA flood maps and NFIP data because we were concerned about the impacts of flooding and sort of how that would impact housing assets and stuff that we value at my agency. And I contracted up with First Street Foundation, which the opposition has mentioned before, got all their data, and I was probably one of the first federal agencies who did that. So even though I say I'm not really versed in climate change, I'm not a climate scientist or environmentalist, but I have a lot of quantitative background in thinking through these issues now. And that's really where I came from, a substantial amount of concern in February when I voted against this project. And in my comments at that point, I had mentioned that that it was just too early for me to make a decision about whether or not they could actually do this. And Mr. Smith actually even mentioned it today about we'd be making a mistake if we sort of assume that they'll behave differently going forward. And I would have agreed if I had heard that in February, perfectly consistent with what I had said in my closing remarks. However, what I've seen since that point is at least getting me over the hump of some of the runoff issues I had raised at that point. I had said it should be context sensitive. We should be careful about the runoff. They hadn't done a good job. That's well documented. My personal feelings is that this project is a potential disaster in some ways for the wetland areas down below. I'm really concerned on a personal level for that. But on a quantitative level, when I sort of separate myself from sort of the ethos of it, I look at the reports that have been filed with both MDE, who's gone there regularly now, and then some of the private consulting reports measuring the outfall from that storm entrapment that they had. And they're actually doing a good job. I was woefully underimpressed with the applicant's experts, who I didn't think gave any expert kind of advice in the February hearing, when they just said, oh, we're just going to put more people out there, or we're just going to change the filters. Like, that is not at all technical or what I would pay anyone to say on the stand. But that aside, I think they've done a good job since then, in at least addressing my major concern that had caused me to vote against this project at that point. So I think today I've gotten past that one main concern on the floodplain. I'm still personally kind of like terrified of potentially, if this goes wrong, it's going to go wrong really, really poorly and really to an extreme potentially. But what we are obligated to kind of consider, I think they've met those considerations now. And it's tough to flip votes. I've done this for this particular case on either the upper or lower lead, I guess, several times where I voted against or voted in support. But today they've gotten past my concerns, and I'm hoping that that's at least a testament to like being open to considering testimony and things and how they've changed over time, whether for good or for bad. And I'm hoping that the applicant will continue to be mindful of the things around there and the runoff in the transition process to getting their property out of the floodplain. And at the same time, I'm hoping that, Ms. Giles, since you're still on, you'll take back to your colleagues and really be closely monitoring to make sure that we don't destroy that area, because it's precious. There's a lot of really great things down there. We have beautiful ecosystems in that area. There's a nice walkway in the park down there to walk through. I very routinely am on the playground there with my kids, and I would be really upset if this were damaged in some way. And I'll continue to have a mindful approach in there and making sure that it is in conformance, and I hope that DPI will do the same. My suggestion when we get to the motion is just one minor clarification, because in being quantitative, I'm also very nitpicky. And in the staff report, there's what actually Mr. Rivera actually just cited, number 4 in the remand referral back to us has said any revised site plan submitted by the applicant shall include evidence of federal and state permits required to commence with any development of the proposed project. Honestly, I don't think the district council is paying attention well enough to its own county code, because it's not talking about local laws in there or really even properly citing the county code in section J within there. Section D, which talks about what I had asked earlier with respect to whether or not we have to consider if they are violating or if they're just sort of they have all the improvements. And County Code 32206, when we go down to that D5, it says the development will not violate other federal, state, or local laws or regulations. I think we need to have that specifically in that section in the staff report when we transmit this. And there's one word that I would pick at in the staff report, because that's what threw me off in preparing for this case. In the response, like midway through that paragraph, it says that a general permit for the discharge of construction stormwater can only be issued following DSP approval. That's not true. We need to submit that word and change it to will only be issued following DSP approval. And this is referring to MDE's approach. If you look at the state regulation, it doesn't say can. They have the ability to do that. It says they may do it. They've taken the stance that they don't want to, which is fine. They can do that. But we need to change that word to just say will only be issued. And then I would insert in that other phrase at the very end about not being in violation of other federal, state, or local laws or regulations, just to be consistent with what we've heard today. Because I think that even if the district council is not clear on their own code or not consistent with their own code, that doesn't mean that we should also follow the same policy. We need to be tight on the state regulations and the county code. So at least from our own stance, we had it clear in terms of what came out of this deliberation. So I'll stop there, but reiterate, thank you to the citizens and other folks. I've gone back and forth on these issues a number of times. I think there's great points made from both sides. On a personal level, I side with the opposition on a lot of the personal concerns on this stuff, but just on a voting level, I'm going to vote in favor because I think they've gotten me past the point at which I was stuck back in February. And I appreciate Mr. Rivera for indulging my nitpickiness and actually measuring on a very routine basis what's going on there. Because even if I'm not happy about what's happening, I can at least see from a quantitative standpoint that things are doing a good job there.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate that. So on Mr. Ward, I'm going to turn to you on Commissioner Dorner's points. There's two things that he's suggesting that I don't know if those are sort of technical enough or substantive enough or where that involves. I don't want to open a can of worms around this, but do you see any red flags with that?
No, none whatsoever. I did have a question for Ms. Kosak if she's still available.
Ms. Kosak, you still on the line? Yes.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, so our recommendation is to adopt the additional findings of your memorandum and issue an amendment to the resolution. So just to clarify, Mr. Dorner's suggestions would be included in the resolution that we will amend and bring back for approval?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
all right.
I
Yeah.
heard what he said, and it can be revised as such.
Okay. So there'll be a resolution that returns, just like any DSP. You're approving the DSP today, and then the resolution will come back with the amendments.
When we see the resolution, we can look, Commissioner Dorner and others, we can look to make sure that that feels like it's reflecting this conversation. Okay, so with that, commissioners, the only thing I want to add is what a number of you said. I want to thank Ms. Giles for being a trooper, going above and beyond, sticking with us through this. It's been incredibly helpful that you've been both educating us, responding, taking a few hits, going through the whole process with us. I appreciate it. And I want to thank the residents, the citizens for making sure that, and the city for making sure your voice is heard on this issue. A bit contentious at times, but as is often the case, this kind of robust debate leads to healthier decisions. So much appreciated. So with that, commissioners, the staff recommendations to approve with conditions, and what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, based on the testimony and evidence in response to the district council's order of remand, I move that we adopt the additional findings that are detailed in staff's memo and issue an amendment to PGCPB resolution number 2023-15 for DSP-21001 to include the technical modification to condition 3 as read into the record earlier by staff, as well as including the technical amendments as stated on the record by Commissioner Dorner.
And I vote for Commissioner Washington. Second.
We got a motion by Commissioner Washington, a second by Vice Chair Bailey. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the roll. Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 4-0. I want to thank everybody for their time and participation on this often contentious issue. Again, Ms. Giles, thank you for sticking with us and being a trooper on this. It's super helpful. So with that, commissioners, I believe that concludes all the items for today's agenda, unless, Mr. Hunt, you have any further business to come before us.
Mr. Chair, there are no additional business items before the board today. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. So without objection, commissioners, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody, for your time.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one. Take care.
Great day.